If you just make sure, you'll just need to say, at this point, we're going to open our public hearing for the state revenue sharing, or we're going to open our public hearing for the review and approval of the 6-year capital improvement plan. And then I'll kind of give a little brief introduction to that, and then we'll call for public testimony, which I don't believe we have any. And then you'll say, okay, the hearing is now closed on those. So we just need to make sure we open it and close it.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
It is 6 o'clock, so we are streaming live over YouTube.
I would add that, and maybe you spoke about this before I signed in, or I'm sorry I was late signing in, but Mayor Axelrod sent some public comment. Is that something that anybody wants to read into the record? We're not required to, but we can.
I thought I saw that he was going to actually present.
He was going to try to make it. He said he had a conflict early, so he didn't know if he would be able to make it or not.
Oh, okay.
And then Tom Meyer will not be speaking.
He's signed up to speak. He's not on yet.
Okay. Well, let's see. Do we have everybody?
So Ed, I think we could leave that decision up to you. Is that correct, Kathy? That he could make that choice as the chair of this meeting?
Sorry, Jules, I'm having a tough time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I was just saying that Ed could make that decision as the chair of the meeting, whether to read that into the record. Is that correct? Or is that a city council decision?
I would think it would be the board's decision. Tim's not on yet, but I would think it'd be the whole board's decision as to if you wanted to read that or not.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have all the counselors. We have the other 5 members of the budget committee, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I guess we'll take roll, right, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just counting. Yeah, you have all 5 counselors and all budget members.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is Wednesday, May 19th, 2021 at 6:03 p.m. And this is the West Linn Citizens Budget Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and do introductions, so we'll just take the roll. Kathy?
Present, or did you want me to call the roll?
Yeah, if you could call the roll, I'd appreciate it.
Abby Farber.
Present.
Ann Frazier.
Present.
Mayor Walters.
Present.
Council President Relier.
Present.
Councilor Baumgartner.
Present.
Ed Schwartz.
Present.
Jerry Gabrielatos.
Present.
John Williams.
Present.
Lauren Breithaupt.
Present.
Josh Camp.
Present.
Ken Warner.
Present.
Lance Calvert.
Present.
Councilor Baumgartner.
Yes, you called me.
Somebody moved or something. Y'all moved around.
Yes, we did.
Aaron Lim.
Present.
Councilor Bielostowski.
Present.
Sheila Waldron.
Present.
Councilor Jones.
Present.
Did I miss anybody? Okay.
We're all accounted for. Thank you, Kathy. So the next item on our agenda is the public comment. We do have, I think we were provided 4 written statements from various members of the community. And now we could decide if we want to read those or if we just want to accept them into the record. So I would be happy to entertain anybody's comments on their thoughts on what we should do with those.
I'm sorry, I need to raise my hand.
Abby?
Thank you, Ed, and I apologize, everyone. I recall in reading Russ's letter that he expected it, there was some expectation that it would be read out loud or read into the record in the beginning. And just as Counselor Jones the other day had said, if people had an expectation of something, that we probably should do it. And I think in fairness, we might, if there's other written statements, that we should read those out loud.
Okay. So you're saying we should read all of the statements then, basically?
Yeah, I don't think there should be favoritism given unless we've got so many. I mean, I also understand we've got a long meeting tonight.
Yeah.
So I haven't made a resolution. I'm just putting out an opinion.
Okay. All right, great. Anybody else with any other, Councilor Galistowski?
I was just going to say that maybe if someone requested that their statement be read, they could be read, but if they didn't request it, then it wouldn't be read, just because there's a knowledge that you can request it be read if you want it to be read. So just my 2 cents.
Well, let me ask this. Have we all, Ann Frazier?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I believe there was some written input on Monday that we did not read. So we should be careful to be consistent.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Well, we did have the one that was specifically requested to be read, and I believe former Mayor Axelrod even requested that a member of the city council read it. If I remember his email correctly. Yeah, council reading these comments into the record. So would anybody like to volunteer to, I'd like to move ahead with reading Mr. Axelrod's comments, and then we'll just take the others into the record, since everybody's received email copies of those. Would anybody like to volunteer to read Russ Axelrod's comment? Did I see a hand or not? Nope.
I can do it. That's fine.
Thank you, Councilor Bialystowski.
Let me just pull it up here. Okay. From Russ Axelrod today, 11:12 a.m. A concern with proposed legal services budget. Mayor Walters, council members, and citizen budget committee members, I am deeply concerned about the proposed budget of $490,000 a year for legal services in the draft budget for the next biennium. This is totally unacceptable. As many of you know, as mayor, I wanted to revisit how our city manages its standard operations legal services, but I was a minority member on council and could not advance the effort during my last term. While I understand we had some exceptional legal issues the last couple of years, this is not the normal operations, and we/you should strive to better manage our standard operational legal costs and services better in the future. Selected this increase as a result of the new rates at $350 an hour that the prior council approved for outside legal services with the Jordan Ramus law firm over my strong objection. Our standard operational legal services should cost approximately $200,000 to $300,000 a year when you look at our typical needs and comparable cities and their approaches. Council should explore its structural options in accordance with our charter that allow alternative models that could serve our city better, with better accountability, improved services, and at much lower costs. Other similar sister cities in our region have done this recently, and all are better served at a much lower cost. I would be happy to work with any of you to explore the city's options to significantly improve our operational legal services that could be obtained at a lower cost. Some of this I presented to the city council previously during my tenure, but as I mentioned, I was a minority on council and could not even advance any exploration of alternative approaches to our standard legal services operation model. I'm submitting my comments now because I'm unlikely to be able to make the testimony schedule of your meeting this evening. I'd appreciate the council reading these comments into the record at tonight's public meeting. Please for now approve only $300,000 a year for standard operational legal services and do the additional and sometimes hard work to reform this service area in a manner that better serves our city's needs. Thank you all for your public service and for considering my comments and recommendations. Respectfully, Russ Axelrod.
Thank you. All right, so with that, I'm ready to move on to the next item on the agenda unless there is an objection from anybody. Seeing none, we will move to item number 4. And so we will open the public hearing on state revenue sharing. And we will start with item 4A, staff presentations on projected amounts and proposed uses.
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz.
I'm
So,
sorry, just one second. We have Councilor Jones, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies for not reacting quicker. I just want to inform the body ahead of time, my apologies that I'll be departing at 7:45 p.m. this evening. I'm hopping on an airplane to go see my daughter graduate from college, but I'm glad I could be with you during this time. So,
Thank you.
and I'll forewarn you that I may request before I leave an opportunity to share a parting comment with you if I anticipate that you may try to finish tonight in my absence. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Lauren, sorry we interrupted.
no
Thanks.
worries, thank you. So the first public hearing is for the state revenue sharing. These are general funds of the state that we get every year. This biennium, we're expecting about $325,000 a year. They are general funds to the city, so we are able to use them in any of the general funds, and we have historically and plan on this budget cycle using them in the planning fund. You'll see that on page 79 under intergovernmental revenue. These funds are used to basically balance the planning fund. And I will open it up for a public hearing on any other proposed uses of these funds or any questions about that. Ed, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Lauren. Sorry about that. Yes, Abby?
Thank you so much, Ed. I think my only question, Lauren, is this a use that you and others think is a good use of the funds? I'm assuming it is because you proposed it there, but, you know, given an opportunity to put it elsewhere, would you rather put it elsewhere?
That's a great question. So, you know, we do have these 5 general funds that we've talked about a couple times here, and specifically on Monday night. And the planning fund is one of those 5 general funds. We use all the general fund resources to allocate to those different funds to you know, to be able to balance those certain funds. So the public safety, parks, and library funds get property taxes. And certain funds get some franchise fees. You'll see the planning fund gets that. So this is the way that we balance that planning fund. We use those revenues. In the future, if we do consolidate those funds into the general fund, you'll see them all just go into the general fund revenues. So all the property taxes, all the state revenue sharing will go into the general fund. So yes, I do think that this is a good use of these funds.
Hey, thank you.
Very well. Yes, Mayor Walters?
Lauren, do you have any sense of exactly where these planning funds will be used?
So all the resources from the planning fund basically come from general funds, with the exception of the fees and charges line item. So if you look at page 79, there's the intergovernmental, which is the state revenue sharing. There's the franchise fees, which are general revenue source that we use to subsidize this fund. There's the fees and charges, and those are planning review fees and development fees. There's miscellaneous, and then there's transfers from the general fund. Those are all the funds that the planning department gets. So any of the expenses spent in the general fund are those are the revenues that are allocated towards them. Does that make sense?
It does. And did you have any specific idea of then how those dollars will be spent?
So those dollars will be spent. Well, we don't necessarily allocate a revenue to an exact expense line item. It's the whole entire bucket of the revenue that's coming into the planning fund is the whole entire bucket of expenses that it's allocated to. So we don't do like a one-to-one, like this revenue goes to personnel, this one goes to materials and services. But as you can see, we're expecting about 325 in intergovernmental. We have about 714,000 in personnel, and 118,000 in materials and services for the first year, and 327,000 in transfers back to the general fund. So any of those three expenses or a combination of those is where these funds will go to.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I think we can move to item 4B, public testimony. Kathy, did we have any public testimony on this item?
There are none.
I'm sorry?
There aren't any.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I think we can close the public hearing on state revenue sharing. And then we will move on to item number 5. And we will open the public hearing on review and approval of 6-year capital improvement plan. So we'll move to item 5A, review and discussion of capital improvement plan projects for fiscal year 2022 through 2027.
Great, thank you so much. So this capital improvement plan is what we're going to talk about mostly tonight. We have Lance Calvert, the Director of Public Works here, and Ken Warner, the Director of the Parks Department here. And they're going to be going over all these capital projects in extreme detail, I'm sure. With that being said, I sent out a link earlier and it's on the agenda for the CIP, and it's also included in your budget. The ones included in your budget have been edited minorly. For the vote that was taken by council last Monday on the 10th to move the White Oak Savannah project to SDCs and to allocate the money to the Willamette River waterfront from the bond fund. So you'll see 2 highlighted areas. With that being said, we tried to keep the numbers the same so it doesn't, change the budgeted numbers that were proposed. So that's why it's allocated in the way that it is. It might not necessarily end up that 520,000 is spent in the first year, but we did want to keep the budget numbers the same to not edit the whole entire budget document. So I'll entertain any questions on that. But like I said, we will be digging a lot deeper into these items in a few agenda items here.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we can move on to, again, item 5B, public testimony. Kathy, do we have any public testimony on this item?
There's not any.
Thank you. So with that, we'll close the public hearing on the review and approval of 6-year capital improvement plan. And we'll move on to item number 6A, budget presentation, personnel services, all funds. Oh, who's going to be talking now?
I can dive a little bit into this. So most of our personnel services we talked about on Monday night. We talked about the major changes to the personnel. As you can see on page, I'm going to go directly to page 16. There's the changes to the personnel that happened over this biennium. You'll see in the emergency or in the city management department that we are adding the emergency operations coordinator, but not but removing the deputy city recorder position. In public works, there was some reclassifications of positions, but the main purpose here is that we are adding the GIS specialist and also adding a community relations coordinator. The administrative staff assistant went from part-time to full-time, and that was within this last biennium. So that's not a change that's happening currently. It's something that's happened over the last couple of years. So it's correcting the schedule here. Library, we did have a reduction. We did not fill the position that we were holding open last year for a library manager. And then there's been some reclassifications of hours to get a net of a negative 0.93 to that fund. In the community development fund, we've reclassed the administrative assistants hours to be 50-50 split between planning and building. I don't know why it was allocated like this in the first place, but it has been a split of the time. So we're now allocating that properly. We are not filling the building plans examiner position. So that's a reduction of 1. In the Parks and Rec Fund, as we talked about, we are adding a parks maintenance worker that is being paid for with the additional increase in the parks maintenance fee of an additional 5%, so 10% total, 88 cents additional per month per household. There's also an additional 0.5 in that fund because the Parks and Rec director who retired in the middle of last biennium was a 0.5, and so when we filled the position with our current Parks and Rec director, it went up to 1.0. So that was just the reclassification of that position there. In the Public Safety Fund, as we've mentioned, we're not filling the police officer position, but we are doing an IGA with Lake Oswego, the city of Lake Oswego, for a behavioral health position that will come out of materials and services for about $75,000 per year. That's a half-time position shared with the city of Lake Oswego. In the water department, this is another reclassification that happened during the biennium. We think that this was just an error in the prior schedule, but it actually is 6 utility workers in that fund, so that's more of a correction. And for the total increase to the budget for personnel is 2.08 positions. With that being said, the other factors that are obviously changing with personnel are we have increases in benefits and in salaries and wages. We have projections of COLAs for about in between 2 and 3% for the biennium. That's cost of living adjustments. We also have, we know that our PERS rates actually went up or are going to be going up in July 1st to about 2% on average. That's actually a lot better than what we expected, but next biennium, we're expecting it to go up significantly more. So probably about a 5% increase the next biennium is what we're projecting for not this 2 years looking, but the 3rd and 4th year out. Health benefits have actually stayed relatively flat the last couple of years, which was great for us, but we do have a projection for the 2nd year of health benefits increasing. I believe it was about 6%, just a projection that we have in there. Other than that, there's the other standard increases in wages for step increases, and currently we are in contract negotiations with CCPOA, and so it's not sure what's going to come out of that monetarily, but we have tried to figure out the best we could to get some projections of what the wages will be for those future years. Are there any questions about any of the personnel related items or benefit assumptions?
Looks like Mayor Walters.
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz. I appreciate it. Lauren, thank you so much for all of your work. I just had 2 questions. Well, one, a statement. First of all, I'd like to really thank Acting Chief Pete Mahuna for being the lead on getting the behavioral health unit from Lake Oswego on that contract going forward. So I'm really, really grateful for his work on that. So I just wanted to say that. But I'm wondering with the parks maintenance increase, what we're hearing from the community is great concern about debris cleanup in our open spaces and parks. And I'm wondering if that park maintenance fee should be larger than it is, and if that is even allowed to be increased beyond what you've proposed.
So the parks maintenance fee, along with the street maintenance fee, are actually a council decision on the increases. So you are able to increase those at your discretion, and that will come back to you in June. Obviously, I'd like you to make the decision now so that we could know exactly how much revenue we're going to have, and especially if we're going to add more expense. However, with that being said, you know, the parks maintenance fee should be tied to the amount of maintenance expense that we have in those funds. I think it's completely appropriate if you say you want to hire another person, another additional person to increase that fee to cover that additional person. What I wouldn't recommend, obviously, is just raising that fee and not hiring someone to make up that difference, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I would love to hear Director Warner weigh in on this, because I would like to hear him share the increase in the amount of acreage that each maintenance person has now been trying to cover. In this time, we've been cutting back and cutting back and cutting back, and now it's overwhelming. And on top of that, there are a lot of people concerned about fire hazards and debris cleanup. We've just had this major storm. Some of it's covered by FEMA, but more work may be done outside of FEMA. So I'm wondering if, you know, if there's a number that you might think is, or Ken Warner thinks might be more appropriate than 88 cents.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, Budget Committee. We'll talk probably later, but in reference to the additional park maintenance worker, that FTE is really an attempt to get us up to where we need to be to just take care of our parks in our normal situation. So we have so many amenities, you know, just on a regular basis, 15 restrooms, 5 splash pads, you know, almost 600 acres of parks, 400 acres of open space. What has happened recently with the ice storm, number one, we do have some debris in our parks. We've been paying tree services to remove hazards, you know, since mid-February, and our staff has been moving that also to Mary S. Young or Wilderness Park. Once we put out the request for proposals to have the private sector hopefully bid and remove those piles, we no longer had a place to take those products. So we do have some smaller piles that are sitting in our parks. And as we come out of this, if we're not going to do another request for proposal, we can start adding back to those piles, unfortunately, to get out of our parks until we take them to large piles to a permanent place. When we talk about wildfires, it's a large conversation. I think the ice storm has probably kind of just brought to the forefront, concerns that we probably all had last September when we had wildfires across the state and the warming of the climate. A park maintenance worker is not going to solve the issues that we have in our open spaces that are at about 400 acres. Most of that is forest land. And there are issues as we've had the the Oregon Department of Forestry come up, walk some of those with us. Some of the concerns are excessive branches on the ground that are stacked higher than 12 to 16 inches. Then we look at branches on trees that aren't 3 times that height, about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. So we aren't creating ladder fuels. So we are working, to address that. We are hiring Northwest Youth Corps. 2 crews will come this summer in July. We'll find, some of our worst areas are identified in the Clackamas County Wildfire Prevention Manual that we're already looking at, and to activate those kids. We're also going to look at activating, our Adopt a Park program and our volunteers to help, those border homes that border all of our open spaces. What we really need to focus on is, money outside of a park maintenance worker, if that's what council would like to spend some money on. As we look at Firewise and the National Fire Protection Association, all of their guidance talks about the zones around your house, 5 feet, 30 feet, and they go out to about 100 feet. So most lots might have 50 to 65 feet from their home, before they get to a property line with either a neighbor or public property. So, we know that all those homes that border our property, we probably need to look at addressing at least 50 feet into our open spaces so that we don't have those ladder fuels and those things that are concerning people right now. So this is an evolving program. It's going to take us a number of years to start to get our forested areas and those open spaces to where we'd like them. Unfortunately, we have about $40,000 in our open space management line item. 20 of that at a minimum every year is going to go to hazardous trees that we might have to remove. So that leaves $20,000 for 400 acres. That's about $50 per acre, which as far as city funding right now doesn't get us very far. So we can certainly discuss this later tonight, now or another time, but I hope that helps a little bit.
It does, and I didn't mean to focus too much on the fire-wise and fire mitigation because I know that that is an emergency management situation. But is 88 cents going to get us to the place where our community members expect our parks to be, how they look, how they're maintained, how they're, is that really the appropriate number?
You're referring to one park maintenance worker?
Well, I just mean in general. I mean, what funding does does your department really need to effectively maintain all of our parks and open space in a way that you think community members expect? I mean, on council, we get tons of emails every day. So I'm sure you do too. So what number do you think is most appropriate?
In my mind, it would probably be 3 new park maintenance workers would start to get us there. When we look at the amount of trails we have, the amount of open space that we do want to start to maintain with some type of normalcy instead of just maintaining it only as open space. So when a tree falls in the forest, it just lays there, which is appropriate unless it's creating some type of fire hazard and ladder fuels. So with the amenities that we've created in our park system, it's a great park system, and we keep adding nicer facilities and newer facilities. And that just means that when they're new and shiny, people expect us to take care of them even more than we did when they were a little dusty and old. So
I absolutely agree. And I think that, people move here to West Linn. They've said it many, many times for our parks and our schools. And so I just want to make sure that people are getting, the parks, they're just getting what they are expecting. So if we're just going to go in with 88 cents and it's still not going to be enough to take care of our parks, maybe we can talk about something a little bit more. That's my thought. So thank you for that information.
Abby Farber.
Thank you very much, Ed. And thank you, Ken, as well, for being forthright about this. I actually came into this and the mayor echoed actually what I wanted to say as well, is that if, our tax revenue was no object, what would it really take to get our parks to a point that you felt was appropriate, both in staffing and it sounded like some services as well. And I too, all of a sudden, have started hearing from people who are very concerned about not so much the parks, but the open spaces as well. I know my neighborhood association is looking at something, and I think I shared that with you as well, about, the youth corps, maybe coming in and getting rid of some of the fuel that could be used, or just hazardous trees. So I am in agreement with the mayor that let's look at this and for once and for all properly staff the Parks Department, which is, as she said, they are our jewels of West Linn.
Thank you, Abby. Any other comments or questions? I'll just add my my support to Mayor Walter's statements as well, and Abby's statements. certainly we have a park. Well, we have two parks in the Savannah Oaks Neighborhood Association, Douglas Park, which is more of an active use park. And then we have the White Oak Savannah Park, which is a passive natural park. And I know how challenging it has been for the Parks Department to coordinate, the clearance of some of the brush up at the top of the park near the homes on Green Street and along the trails, et cetera. So I would fully support, some additional park maintenance people as well to help with some of that. So, yes, Ann Fraser.
I agree with what you're saying in principle, but I also think that it would be a mistake to try to add park people at the expense of some other places in the budget. And I'm thinking about things like streets and a number of other budgets, because it's always nice to add staff to get a better service. But if we have to look at priorities, then I think we have to look at a bigger picture than just what would be good for the parks. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Walters.
I really appreciate that, Anne, and that's a great comment. But I think we're talking about increasing the park maintenance fee, and that wouldn't, unless I'm wrong, and please correct me, that wouldn't impact other parts of the budget if we're increasing the fee. Is that correct?
That would be correct. And to clarify on that, so we generally increase the parks fee and all other utilities and the streets maintenance fee by 5% per year. Currently, that would be about 88 cents. So in this budget, we have a 10% increase. So it's $1.66. If we were to add an additional parks maintenance worker, it would be an additional 5% increase approximately. A parks maintenance worker 3 is about 50, is the lowest step is about 55,000 a year. Benefits are usually around 65% of the salary. So 55,000 times 1.65 is about $91,000 a year. With about 8,500 households, that 88-cent increase gets us about one parks maintenance worker.
And I think I heard Ken saying that 3 would probably get us to where we might want to be. And I would also just like to add that I would rather be, not rather, but I'd rather be paid a park maintenance fee than the mayor fee. That's just a joke.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert, you have a comment?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just one thing to remember, our operations facility is already beyond capacity with staffing. So while I appreciate the sentiment of support for operations needs in parks and all city facilities and operations, there are other costs that go along with those issues. So just to be aware that while we are diligently looking at that, it's sometimes not as easy as adding people.
Very well, thank you. And Mayor Walters, did you have another comment?
No, I'm sorry, I'll lower my hand.
Anybody else with any comments or questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, I think we can move. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Bialystowski.
I just wanted to say that I'm going to think about this, and maybe we can revisit this question later in the meeting, or after we could chew on it for a little bit.
Thank you.
I didn't know if we're supposed to make a decision right now, or if we can do that later.
I think it's completely appropriate for us to do that later. So I think how I kind of envision this is that we have the capital presentations next from Lance and Ken, and then budget committee deliberation and vote comes next on the agenda. And whether that be all tonight or we move that on to Wednesday or to next Monday night. And I think during that time would be the time to discuss all the deliberations, anything that needs to be changed. including the 3 different things that I put in the potential motion and items like this, where we talk about, potentially wanting to add additional expense to the budget.
Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. Lauren, you've shared with us before, and you told us again tonight that we're limited to a 5% increase in our various fees. The fact that we're proposing a 10% increase in parks this biennium, how are we able to do that? Do we have to go to the voters for a vote, or what allows us to go beyond that 5% limitation?
So that 5% limitation is our municipal code cap on utilities specifically. So that's water, sewer, and storm drain charges. The street maintenance fee and the parks maintenance fee fall outside of that code requirement. So the council sets master fees and charges for that.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this item? Yes, Abby Farber?
Thank you very much, Ed. And this is perhaps a question for Lauren, and I know, I've raised this a few, not raised it, but I'm trying to figure out just in terms of protocol for committee that if we have questions on any items, be it personnel or some of the other things, is now the time to raise it, or do we wait until the discussion after hearing the capital presentation?
I think if you have items related to personnel, now would be an appropriate time, but if it's related to another item that you've either heard on Monday or something that we're about to talk about with capital, then I think at the budget deliberations, that would be the appropriate time.
Great, and I think that what I have is pertinent to the latter. So for the presentation, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for steering me through all this. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Lauren, I did have a question. So we're in personnel services. Does that cover the legal services as well, or is that a separate discussion later?
That would be separate also. So legal services is in materials and services in the council department. It's kind of interesting because it kind of crosses the line of personnel and materials and services if it was talking about adding an in-house city attorney, but and I think it would be appropriate either place. And if you wanted to discuss those things now, I think that would be fine, but also could be later on in the discussion.
I think I'll defer it for now till later on. So we can. So any other questions or comments on this item, personnel services? Okay, seeing nothing, we'll move on to item 6B, Public Works, Support Services, Streets, Water, Environmental Services, System Development Charge Funds, General Obligation Bond Fund, and Capital Improvement Plan. Lance?
Thank you, Chairman Schwartz. Lauren, did you want to tee up any of this beforehand, or do you just want me to run with it?
I just want you to run with it, Lance. I think that's a great plan.
I've been here too long. I can run with it. So just to give you guys a little bit of background about Public Works in general. Public Works includes all of the items that you've heard listed, and that includes what we refer to as Public Works Support Services, which is part of the general fund, the separate streets fund, the separate water fund, the separate environmental services fund, which includes stormwater and sewer. And then that's where those funds really account for pretty much all of our personnel and expenditures in those areas of operation, as well as most of the capital funding. And then also under Public Works would be the system development charge funds that are related to each of those utility funds, as well as our transportation general obligation bond projects. And in general, Public Works is largely the keeper of the capital improvement programs, because most of those are outside of parks, is located in those utility funds. Other fund that's not listed on your budget committee meeting for tonight, but also part of Public Works, is our fleet budget, which is also in the general fund. One of the things to remember about Public Works is Public Works doesn't collect any property taxes, so none of your property tax bills, none of your what most people think of regular tax revenue comes to Public Works. Public Works is wholly supported by your monthly utility bill. That's where the vast majority of our Public Works revenue comes from, is through utility billing, as well as shared revenue for streets. So your motor fuel tax allocation to the city goes to the street fund. And then I think a small bit of, I think our solid waste franchise goes to Public Works as well. So by and large, Public Works is utility driven and really what I consider sort of the business side of city government. There's no significant local taxes coming to your Public Works operations, but we fund all of the basic services and needs of the city in those different utility categories. Like in the case of the general fund for Public Works support services, which is really Public Works administration and engineering, revenue for those areas comes through from transfers from the different utility funds, as well as from permitting fees and charges, stuff like that. So Public Works support services, which is located on page 52 if you're following along in your binder or your budget book, is really the administrative side of Public Works, which includes myself and my staff, as well as all of our engineering staff and our GIS staff. This year we are looking to sort of add back a GIS specialist position that was deleted several years ago. And really the driving factor behind the addition of that position is the need for asset management and asset documentation. So, for example, in this latest storm event, it would have been really helpful to have that person to document and facilitate those charges and scopes of services and work orders, work order processing systems, and really the IT behind how we do everything in Public Works. Asset management is a big part of what we do in Public Works. We are the keepers of most of the city's assets, and keeping an inventory and documentation of those assets is a really critical function of the city. This year we are actually acquired a new asset management IT system called Lightship. It replaces our old IT system called Cartograph. That system's actually no longer supported software by the manufacturer and vendor. And so if anybody remembers the YourGov app and the YourGov system for reporting requests to the city, that was discontinued by the vendor, and we're in the process right now of revising that and putting out a new platform based on the Lightship software platform. So, and all that would be cloud-based computing systems. In general, outside of that, I don't really have anything specific about Public Works support services. It's pretty consistent in our operations. Like I said, obviously with the addition of the staff, we're also looking at adding a communications person specific to Public Works, largely because the sizable capital projects that are coming into our pipeline, which will allow us to free up our technical staff and engineering staff to focus on the technical aspects of the projects moving forward, while the communications person can do outreach and education and communication with individuals out in the field. That person will actually be mostly based out of operations, same as our GIS asset management position specialist. Both of those are mostly operations based in the field kind of positions that are supporting our technical staff so they can stay focused on the technical items while these other support positions focus on these supporting needs. With that, other highlights from Public Works Support Services, page 52 includes sort of an update. You'll see other purchase services going down because, like I said, we've purchased software and stuff here in the past, and that's starting to get back to a more normal level. Professional and technical services, we vary quite a bit in that category depending on what is happening in the community. Public Works will actually work on land use and planning cases where we'll hire and contract with consultants to do sometimes plan reviews, including traffic analysis. We also hire consultants for surveying internally. A lot of those development support items get offset by revenue from developers who then fund those items. So depending on the development that's occurring in any given year, that number can fluctuate up and down. And the reason we do that is we want to make sure that the consultants that are doing those kind of development reviews are being hired and paid through the city, and then the city's getting reimbursed from the developer and not hired directly by the developers, and then possibly getting a biased opinion from those consultants. So anyway, that's Public Works support. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that particular one before I move on to the next one.
Any questions? I think I saw Mayor Walters first.
Mine's just a general question, so if Liz has more to present, I can wait.
What was it? What was the question?
I'm sorry, I was just saying that I have just a general question, so if you have more to present, I can wait.
Okay. So yeah, we'll hold that till the end of Lance's presentation. Next up is Sheila Waldron and then Ann Frazier. Sheila?
Thank you. So I just have a question. So I was looking at the personnel when you were speaking about the FTE ad of the GIS specialist, and I see there's a GIS coordinator. So I was just wondering if you could help me better understand the difference between those two functions and then
Sure.
iterating the need to add.
So our GIS coordinator is our only GIS technical person currently on staff. The coordinator oversees our Westland Maps system, and that basically maps and tracks all of our infrastructure in a graphical format, as well as is the official record keepers for all of our as-builts and utility lines. So when we're like, for example, tracking all of our tree inventories is in there, tracking all of the utility lines are in there. When we are doing locates, which are required by state law, we'll use those mapping systems that are generated and maintained and updated by the GIS coordinator to do all that kind of field work. The GIS specialist would basically be more of an entry-level position and a support function to the GIS coordinator, but the GIS specialist would actually focus on asset management and our supporting GIS Lightship software. So in the GIS specialist role, they'll be not just tracking maps and mapping every piece of infrastructure we own and maintain, but they'll be actually helping staff in the field doing real-time data entry and work order management. So when somebody makes a request, to Public Works, say there's a pothole somewhere that needs to be fixed. That request will be tracked through Lightship and that system that the GIS specialist will be the primary keeper of. And then that request would then be delivered directly to the field person. The field person would enter the solution or the how they would address that issue, and then report that back through that same system, and then actively interact with whoever made that request. So I hope that answers your question, but it's just basically a lot of that technical back-end support in I think modern delivery of systems that people have come to expect, where when I make a request, I get an immediate response, and then get to the appropriate person, and then make sure that we're not duplicating entry. Same thing with utility work, utility requests that come through City Hall or through the city's website. All that would be managed by the GIS specialist.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And Fraser?
Thank you, Ed. I just have a question about the new position in communications. And I understand that that need is being driven by the GO bonds and the kind of a large amount of work that's going to be done in the next year or two. But is that, in your experience, is that need going to continue indefinitely, or do you see it as more a short-term position based on the bonds that are being used at the moment?
I think it would probably, it's a great question. I think if we only had the bonds projects, I would agree it would be a short-term position, and we probably wouldn't see that position for an indefinite period of time. But in this case, we actually have more than just the GO bond projects going on. We have a number of capital projects in each of our different utility funds that are actually significantly more than what I've seen here in the past, because of need for infrastructure updates and replacements. We also have quite large projects for agencies that are not City of West Linn, namely ODOT's I-205 project, where we actually work in coordination with ODOT in a project of that scale, and they reimburse us for a lot of our time and effort on that scale and size of a project. Part of that ODOT project is also the relocation of our major water line, which is our source supply line from South Fork in Oregon City. And that's one of the largest projects, actually, probably several $1 million project to complete. And will require a lot of outreach as well, because there will be times when we do have to switch water, shift water, possibly even shut off water, just to facilitate that bridge project. So I think there's a lot of communication and a lot of coordination. So that person will not just be coordinating and communicating with city staff and the city citizenry, but also with those outside agencies like ODOT. Hopefully, someday all these huge capital projects will stop and we can get to just a normalcy, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon.
Looks like Jerry Gabrielatos has a question or comment.
Sure, just for perspective, the community relations coordinator is a position that's currently housed within the city manager's office. And when people call through our menu, inevitably the calls will get to the city manager's office. And I would say that 75% of the voicemails that I get are related to public works related items. And it's everything that you would expect. It's the questions about things that you can ride or walk on, or a utility line that got moved, or all of this sort of randomness of living in the city. And Alicia takes on a lot of that work, because oftentimes just it requires a half hour probably on a call back. And that's just with navigating the constituent service end of this for the everyday parts of living in a city. So it's one that the city manager's office feels feels a little bit of a burden just because we don't have that position right now. Just to add on to that a bit, because I know a few of you are neighborhood presidents, what I'd like to see that position doing if this position is added, at least the one within the city manager's office, is doing more outreach with the neighborhood groups and bringing more engagement in the community in general, not just responding to concerns about potholes or whatever other regular municipal issue we run into.
And I'll just confirm what Jerry just said, is that we get tons of emails and calls about public works issues as counselors. In fact, my husband left me a voicemail today about a pothole on Tamler. So that's where we are.
I know the pothole of which he speaks. Mr. Councilor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Jerry began already to address my question, but it's spurred by the things being asked of Lance. These various calls that come in from public works questions right now. Some are fielded by the city manager. Lance answers a lot of them himself. By the way, Lance, you're a very eloquent writer. Very impressed with your work. Others, he said, are taking some of your technical work. Certainly, some of this is taken by Dylan Digby and Alicia Schroyer. Hiring this communications individual to work primarily or exclusively in public works, what, Jerry, is this going to free up Dylan Digby and Alicia Schroyer to do? And what's the net gain for the city with them not doing a lot of these calls now?
Sure. So for those who don't know, Dylan Digby is the assistant to the city manager. He is a brilliant guy who's a utility player. And I mean that in a flattering sense. And that is to say that he is able to take on anything in the city and get it across the finish line. And oftentimes he works with Alicia on navigating a lot of items related to public works. So the two of them will help out on the outreach that you have all seen. And that is to say, response to the storm, response to the Main Street parking configuration, or just the general design, things of that nature. Those massive projects that generate a lot of constituent feedback, Dylan and Alicia often work in tandem on those issues. This position also just frees up a little bit more of Dylan's time. One of the positions that you don't see in the budget is management analyst for the Parks and Recreation Department. One of the things I've talked about with Dylan is backing up our Park and Rec director to take on some of the work that you'll hear Ken talk about tonight. The Park and Rec department is just as busy as Public Works, having to get a lot of projects from the Go Bond across the finish line, as well as maintaining all of those parks and frankly, a lot of contract management that Dylan has a skill in that I think can help our Park and Rec department. So our city, the wonderful part about cities is that they're dynamic, and what we try to put forward in this budget is a team that can respond nimbly to all the things that we have to navigate every day. I hope that answers your question, Councilor Jones.
Any other questions on this portion of Lance's presentation? Seeing nothing, Lance, would you like to continue on?
Sure, thanks. The next item up in Public Works in the budget, as we flip through page 54, is vehicle and equipment maintenance. We have a full-time and a part-time or seasonal position doing our fleet maintenance. In a city this size, with the inventory that we have, we would normally have to have a significantly larger fleet support budget, but we've been able to be very proactive in our capital equipment replacement and keeping our equipment in pretty good condition. And that has helped to keep our ongoing O&M expenses in check. The other issue, of course, that I mentioned previously is our actual operations buildings are not big enough to house any more fleet support. All of our fleet support, and you'll see this number going up on occasion is largely through contractual services, where our lead mechanic is really doing a lot of project management and oversight of contractual services because we just don't have the space to do it, even if we wanted to. And so fleet is a relatively small FTE section, but it supports all the vehicles, all the equipment in the city in its entirety. Again, I don't really have anything hugely significant to highlight in this, other than it is a support function of the city. In the case of fleet, I believe the fleet costs are split and allocated by vehicles. And Lauren can, correct me on that if I'm wrong, but there's an allocation process, and fleet is paid for through transfers based on those allocations.
Any questions for Lance on this piece? Yes, Abby, I think your hand was up first, and then we'll go to Ann.
Great, thank you very much, Ed. Lance, thank you for very clear explanations of all these moving parts. I don't know if this is the point in the presentation to ask about it, but I had also heard, I think through testimony you've given before City Council, perhaps even articles, that our public service building is not adequate for, or the shop, whatever it is not adequate and is actually in some cases possibly unsafe. And does that come under this, looking at this, and is there something we can do? Because that sounds pretty urgent.
Yeah, thank you for that. The place for that would probably be in our capital conversation, not in fleet, but for purposes of our discussion tonight, yeah. I mean, our operations building is and yard is, for sort of a show of scale, is smaller than the one in Gladstone. I think Oregon City just moved into a new facility. They are retaining their old facility for space, and their new facility is probably 5 or 6 times bigger than ours. And they're supporting roughly the same amount of area. So, well, even though their population's a little higher. So, yes, there's some deficiencies there. It's not a place the public goes. It's not a place the public sees. It's not, unfortunately, no matter how you cut it, Public Works, for the most part, including our operations building, is not super fun. So we don't see a lot of public involvement in that, but it is a very important, foundational piece of the community, and would be something that we do need to look at. We have been pursuing that. The biggest issue for the city and our operations facility is finding space. You need a several acre site that is relatively flat to house something of that nature. Typically, those kinds of facilities are located in more of an industrial park kind of setting. We have neither several acres of flat space that are commonly available to the city, and we also don't have very much in the way of industrial parks in the city. So we are currently working with ODOT on the potential acquisition of the space of the slope along Salamo that would give us adequate space. And there's actually a couple tiers. It's not flat, but there are a couple flat tiers in there that we could potentially use, and that would isolate the Public Works facility from the surrounding neighborhoods and button us up tight to I-205. So we are pursuing that. It looks promising, but every time I think I move forward with ODOT, I move a step backwards. So I'm still working on that. Once we have a site that we do have included in the budget, a sort of preliminary design and engineering for those improved facilities. So I think there's more to come there, and we'll probably see that in the budget, CIP, and in the other utility funds that'll be mainly be funding that. But if anybody has any great ideas on several acres of flat land around West Linn that's inexpensive, please let me know.
Just if I could add on to that, the only thing I think we have as an industrial park is the paper plant. Is there just no available space down there, or is it just too difficult to access?
No, there's really nothing available there, because if you actually look at that industrial zoned area, it's by and large owned by PGE and reserved as what's called FERC property, as Federal Environment Energy Regulation Commission, I think.
Oh, the FERC, yes.
And really ties to the origin of the really the origin of PGE and the power plant that's on the falls. They do generate power there to this day, and I think the falls was actually the starting point of Portland General Electric.
Yep, first electrical transmission in the West.
Yes. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
Very difficult site.
Ann Fraser?
Thank you, Ed. This is a very minor question, but in your vehicle and equipment maintenance budget, on the utilities line, utilities seem to have gone down to about a third in 2022 and 2023 compared to the previous 2 years, and I wondered if you could comment on that.
Sure. So utilities is largely fuel and oil and lubricants, those kinds of items. In the past, actually, some other departments, namely parks, had their fuel charges charged to fleet. And what you'll see is those fuel charges have been moved to the appropriate department as we get better at tracking and inventorying our fuel and fuel usage and consumption. So each department, you know, in this transparency of accounting, our goal is to make sure that you truly see the cost of each one of those different divisions. And so you'll see fuel move to those different areas. Now that being said, because we have a relatively good condition fleet, fuel consumption has been going down, and costs have been down with the lower price of gasoline. So of course, gasoline costs are bouncing back up. So we'll see how that plays out. But in this particular budget, that decrease is largely because we're cost accounting for those in each different fund.
I see. And how about electricity when you have electric vehicles? Is that in that line as well?
No, so for, currently we don't have any electric vehicles, but we are working towards acquiring some. When electricity comes into play for vehicles, that electricity cost will be in facilities budget as of right now, because it's such a minor part of our overall electrical usage. As electrification becomes more mainstream and we see more of our vehicles converting over to electric, particularly if we start converting large vehicles, which I don't see happening for several years because of the cost dynamics of that. But eventually that will be a conversation of how do we account for that electricity use and how do we split that up between departments.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Lance on this piece? Seeing none. Lance, do you have more for us?
Sure. So we're going to make a big jump in the budget book and go to page 84 and go to streets. Streets is our street utility fund. It is largely funded, like I said, through our street fee on the utility bill, as well as the motor fuel tax shared revenue that we get from the state. We also got an infusion that's starting to show up here on the revenue side from the vehicle registration fees that the county collects or has put forward through the state DMV. I don't know if anybody remembers, but the county put forward, I think it was like a $40 vehicle registration fee. Majority of that money goes to the county, but some of it goes to each individual city, so we get a portion of that as well. So all of your street maintenance is funded through the street fund. Some street improvements are also funded through our GO bond. And some street improvements are also funded through our transportation SDCs. Also included in this fund is all the personnel services for all your street maintenance, like the pothole request on Tandler, as well as the snow plowing operations, all of our ice storm debris removal came from this and is funded through this fund through our property public right-of-way areas that are maintained by the street fund. So anything ice related or ice storm damage related that's related to streets, that was allocated to this fund. Now, one thing that you will notice is that cost is largely earmarked under capital outlays, street projects, which is a big general number for all of our capital outlays. We didn't really go over significantly because we had actually been stockpiling and reserving some of those capital outlays from this year to go into next year to match with the Highway 43 improvements for the ODOT project on Highway 43. So it's a balancing act because we obviously have needs for our local street maintenance. Typically, we spend about $1 million a year on local street maintenance. This year and last year, we decreased that. And you see that in the 2019-2020 actuals, because we were trying to build a balance so that we could do our match to the Highway 43 project. While the Highway 43 project is grant funded, it is only partially grant funded. So we still need to provide our local match to the project, and this is one of the locations where we match projects like Highway 43. We also match some projects in the bond with this street fund. So remember, in the transportation bond, when the transportation bond was first conceived, or sorry, when the GO bond was first conceived, there was conversations on what and where and how to spend that. And there's competing priorities. Of course, transportation could have taken all of the GO bond money because we have a pretty much endless need for transportation improvements in the city of West Linn. Whether it's sidewalks or safe routes or improvements to pavement conditions, additions, widenings, additional parking, you name it, there's needs for that, and that is a huge number. And so for the GO bond, what we did at the time was allocate a certain portion of the GO bond to transportation projects. Those projects are earmarked and shown in our city website, but only part of those transportation projects are actually funded through the GO bond. The GO bond transportation projects are actually matched with money from the street fund. So like on the case of the recent work on Main Street, Willamette Falls Drive, the GO bond paid for a lot of the sidewalk work, a lot of the undergrounding of the utilities work, but the street fund paid for the street resurfacing and all the pavement maintenance. And then we also match a lot of those GO bond projects with other funds, whether it be environmental funds, and we'll get to that later, for drainage improvements or drainage systems. That would be in the environmental fund, as well as matching those GO bond projects with other funds like the SDC funds, which are developer contributions. And I'll touch base on those a little later and how those work. But anyway, you can see that we basically pair all these different funds together and manage all the accounting of these funds to deliver these large capital projects. It was a lot easier when I started here because we didn't have a GO bond and we didn't have all these competing interests and needs, and we pretty much just did basic local road maintenance, and we would, you know, mill off the old pavement and put on the new pavement. It was pretty simple. Today, it's much more complex, has a lot more moving parts and a lot more dynamics involved in each of these large capital projects. That's basically the street fund in summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything specific about streets.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and Lance, thank you for that. I thought I learned during my budget pre-meeting that our street cleanup primarily was paid for through materials and services, which would explain the jump from fiscal year 2020 to 2021. But I thought I heard you say a moment ago that it came through capital outlay street projects. Will you just clarify for me, or is it both?
No, sorry, that's correct. The most of the street cleanup was actually the big increase in materials and services, because we're hiring contractual.
Because we contracted it out.
For that. The capital outlays are actually our matches to the bond fund projects, as well as our current and ongoing capital road improvements. Sorry,
so on that line, Lance, on the capital outlay street projects line, then as we just follow that line across page 84, then that's why we're seeing that number jump and stay up for the next few fiscal years, is because it's matching GO bond projects. Is that correct?
GO bond projects 43 and completing all of our normal pavement maintenance and repair projects.
Thank you.
Abby Farber.
Thank you. And I just have a quick question for Ed and then for Lance. Ed, would you like us to use the raise hand feature in this software, or is waving our hand good enough?
Either one's fine. Either one's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Whatever works best for you. Thank you so much, Lance, and thank you for your work. Thank you for coming to our neighborhood association meetings and explaining why things are or what things happen, and how in some projects your team has been unsung heroes, like the famous water pipe incident over the holidays. I will never forget that. But I like how you do work and the quiet way in which you do it. This is a general question. I mean, much like we asked Ken earlier, do you feel you have the proper size staff and budget to do this work on streets that needs to be done? I will say, as a neighborhood association president, I also hear about the potholes and things like that. And, you know, that seems to be a biggie.
Sure. So for general, you know, I don't, maybe that's a tackle it in each of the individual funds kind of question, but I think in general, from a staffing perspective, you know, my style is to try and keep our staff minimal and keep our expertise strong, because these are really technical areas that require a lot of technical knowledge, and you can't just find those people every day. So keeping that core group whole has always been my function and goal. We rely a lot on consulting services and contractual services for a lot of our a lot of our capital projects, particularly the very large capital projects that we couldn't just manage without a huge increase in staff. And capital projects vary, right? So they'll ebb and flow. So Usually you don't want to ramp up staff terribly high if you're going to see that capital project list, someday come back down to normalcy. So I think we're in a pretty good place. I mean, I think every department would always like more staff, but I think that, because we want to deliver good services and we want to have people appreciate, this with what they're getting for the city. I think my goal is always to deliver value and find the right size and the right person for the job. So it just depends on how we work that to get that done. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we're actually pretty well covered. I wish it wouldn't snow a whole bunch of. I wish we wouldn't have 3 inches of ice once a year.
I moved out here from the East Coast
Sure.
specifically to avoid the snow, and I
Yeah.
feel like, the promise has not been kept. I think I was more thinking about, there seems to be, for at least the ones we hear, a public perception that street maintenance has somehow become less. Do you keep, in talking about the inventory, do you keep some kind of performance record of what the quality of the streets are, good, acceptable, oh my God, or, those sorts of things?
Yes, we do. We have a pavement condition index survey. We contract that work out because we want unbiased opinions on what those ratings are. And we do that every few years. Our ratings actually in the city's local street network has gone up every year that I've been here. I think when you hear people talking about Westland streets, it really is about Highway 43 and it really is about ODOT. I think we do a pretty good job. I mean, there's always needs, and certainly if the city wanted to bond to, accelerate, some of that, we could. There's a lot of ways to tackle streets, but I think most of the time what I hear is Highway 43, and that's why we've put a huge amount of effort into trying to lift ODOT to do improvements to Highway 43, including committing our own local funds to trying to see those improvements move forward. And we are starting to see some success in that effort. It's a slow roll with ODOT, but I think once you get the wheel turning, it tends to keep moving, and hopefully we can continue that success. Like the Highway 43 grant funded project. We got that grant several years ago. ODOT's still working on design of that project. I meet with them, seems like every week, and every time it seems like I meet with a new person in charge of the project. So it's taxing to work with that agency, but we will get it done. And I saw planning documents to see improvements for Highway 43 that date back to late 70s, early 80s, and it still looks the same today. So to see actual improvements on 43, I think in the next couple of years will be a great step forward. Part of the problem with ODOT is to do any kind of significant resurfacing on Highway 43, they have to update all the handicap ramps. And it's not just the ramps, it's all of the traffic signals, it's all of the support equipment. Westland is really steep, and it just makes it really difficult to meet ADA requirements, particularly the way ODOT does it. And it just blows up the cost of everything. So they just, they literally, it's pulling and prodding and getting our state reps and all of our constituents to push ODOT to make those investments in 43.
Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I just had a question, and I don't know if this is the right place for it, about we've had some contacts recently, concerns about sidewalks. And is there a place to talk about that?
Sure. So streets is a great place to talk sidewalks. Pretty much most of our sidewalk improvements are funded through the streets fund. So that would all be here. We also have some money earmarked towards sidewalks in the GO bond. And we also have a bike and ped SDC fund. Most of that money right now is allocated to our GO bond project list for those improvements. We also, pre-COVID, did outreach on to each neighborhood on safe routes to school, worked with the school to identify a safe routes map for each school. That's all on the school district website. And we're currently working on doing design work to do some of those safe route improvements. We went to each neighborhood association and asked them to identify their top priority projects and prioritize those projects in those lists, and we're working on that. Sidewalks are really hard because there's really no way to build a sidewalk without impacting the adjacent private property, and you know, it becomes very difficult and requires a lot of outreach and a lot of coordination. Sometimes it requires temporary construction easements or right-of-way acquisitions. So it just becomes a real challenge. And then also to remember on trip hazards or issues like with sidewalk maintenance, that the city code, municipal code requires the adjacent property owner to maintain that. So that would not show up in our budget here, but it would actually be a requirement of code through code enforcement to get that those kinds of improvements done through by the adjacent property owner and permitting through Public Works.
Thank you.
Any other questions on streets before we move to water? Seeing none. Lance? Oh,
Sure.
I'm sorry. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you as Chair if, since I need to leave in about 13 minutes or so, if sometime in the next 5 minutes, if I can break from topic just to share a comment with the group, lest they adopt a budget tonight. If you could accommodate that sometime in the next 5 minutes, Chair, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Lance, would you mind if we pause for just a few minutes to allow Councilor Jones to?
Great place to break.
Okay. Please proceed, Councilor Jones.
I appreciate that. And folks, I'm only going to share this in the event that you might actually finish your work and adopt the budget tonight. I just wanted this perspective to be shared. I want to start by thanking Lauren and Josh and Jerry for the immense amount of work that they put into producing this draft budget, and of course for our department heads and the immense amount of work that they put into it. And certainly thank all of you for the important role we play in representing the public as we prepare to adopt this. After our meeting Monday, I went back through the budget and looked at some things and just want to flag something with you. On pages 8 and 9, we have the goals that we adopted as a council this spring. And on page 9, under goal 4, initiative 2B says to support small and local businesses with a dedicated individual in the city to support businesses. And what struck me about that, folks, is the page I really want you to see is page 40. And I'll give you a moment to find that page in your budget book, page 40. And if you look at page 40, what stands out to me is that it's basically empty. And just last week with my government students, we talked all about the federal budgeting process and what they do and how they do it. And one of the principles we talked about was how a budget is a reflection of what we value. And this page sends a message. Now, this has been arguably the most trying time for small businesses in our community and communities all over the country and all over the world in generations. And we're talking right now about rezoning Highway 43, about developing our waterfront. All of these things are going to create opportunities for us to draw businesses to support our consumers, to grow a healthy economy here in our city, if we have someone in a position to help us do that. We're talking about the multi-million-dollar deficit in the next biennium. And you would think that this would be a time when we'd want to be working to stabilize our tax base with the support that can come from businesses. And as I think about all these three things, the challenges of our current businesses, the rezoning and developing that we're talking about doing, the budget deficit that we're facing, and it just seems tailor-made to me for someone that can help us address these things by being in this position. I'm not suggesting we don't do anything. I know that John Williams has worked his butt off to support businesses, particularly during the past year with the work he's done to get CARES grants to them and other things. But I think you all recognize that John Williams has more on his plate than we should ask any one person to do. It's not out of line for us to have someone in a position like this. As I shared with you on Monday, folks, Wilsonville is touting all the amazing things that their individual in this role is doing for that city right now. Canby has 2 people that are dedicated to doing this in tourism. Oregon City has 3. With what I shared with you on Monday, the information from the League of Cities, they identified 11 cities of our size. 9 of them have someone in this capacity to do this stuff. And the last thing I want to flag for you is across from page 40 is page 41. And if you look at page 41, our performance measures under our strategy say we want to raise the profile of economic development in the business community with the city and retain and strengthen and expand business opportunities in the city. And the fact that those performance measures are juxtapositioned up against page 40, I think also speaks volumes. I think that every one of the positions that we have proposed to add to our staff are greatly needed and greatly make sense. But to be quite honest with you, if I stood in a room of small business owners and managers in our community right now, I would have a difficult time telling them that every single one of these positions is more important than having someone to support them. And so what I want to share before I need to leave in a few minutes is if you decide to vote on this budget tonight, I need to express that as it's currently drafted, I do not support it, and I would vote against it.
Thank you, Councilor Jones. Let's move back to Lance and move to water now. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Walters.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Todd. I think that's so important. And I had a long conversation over the last few days with the city manager and the deputy city manager on exactly that, along with Councilor Bielostowski. And what I think we were looking at was that the waterfront and the 43 corridor, what we really need is some supplement in planning and not so much in economic development, but on those 2 projects. But absolutely for our businesses, we do need more supports and more resources for our local businesses, especially as they recover from this situation with COVID. So I think the hope is that if we could find some sort of funding source to do the planning on those 2 projects, that would free Jerry and John up a little more to jump back into being that support, especially as we work through a lot of these police reform issues. Jerry's schedule will also lighten up. But I absolutely agree with you. I think every time we all look at this budget, we just realize that we just don't have enough resources to manage the city in the way that the community wants it to be taken care of. We have the lowest tax rate in the region. Everybody looks at their property bill and their head falls off, but people have to understand that half of that is the school district, and most people move here for the school district, and our property rates are as high as they are because of the school district and our parks and our access to the river. So I think there's a balance in there. I'm not sure if an FTE and it may be, and I could be wrong because I'm not an expert. I'm not sure if an FTE in that position is the right choice, but definitely we want to make sure that our lens in this biennium is on increasing resources and revenues so that this community can continue to grow and thrive.
If I might say something in response, Chair.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you sharing that. And I sense from our study of the budget, we don't need to raise more revenue to fund this particular position, or to be honest with you, potentially other positions. I think we have the money in the budget to do it, and I'm happy to have that conversation with anyone if they would like to. Thank you.
No, I agree with you, Todd, and I think what we're looking at the moment is this ridiculous legal services, fund. I cannot believe how it's like grown time and time again. I'm not sure that we're allocating the right amount to legal services based on what we get in return. And I think that would be a great resource to look at to help offset some of these costs. Do you have other ideas on that notion? If so, please share.
Did you mean now or sometime?
Right now, if you have time.
Yeah, I can sit down and go through item by item with you. Certainly the legal services is the big kahuna, if you will. There's a big chunk of change there, but I think that several questions that I've kept notes on over here that people have asked about various things that would have great value. I mean, there's nothing in this budget that is a waste. There's nothing that we should not do. But there are things that potentially we could say, yeah, we could live without that for another biennium, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Whether it's a material and service thing, or it's a training thing, or a number of things that we could pencil together and potentially do something. And item by item by item, I could certainly put that together.
You have a second to just kind of go through a few of them off the top of your mind?
Yeah, let me read here from my notes one moment.
Chair Schwartz, could I just make a quick interjection while Councillor Jones is looking at his notes?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
I agree with both him and the mayor that there's no fat in this budget, not that I can see, not that the leaders have presented. I would very much like Councillor Jones to present, his thoughts. It would be even better if it could be in writing. I came into this meeting also feeling that I was not ready to vote on the budget just yet. There's so much more we have to hear, and I'll try not to ask too many questions, but, should it somehow tonight get to the point of the vote, I'm not ready to support the budget, certainly not as is, and want to hear more about what Councillor Jones has to say, as well as others, about ways that we can better address things.
Thank you. Councilor Jones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the notes where people question, for example, professional and technical services under human resources jumping from 118,000 to 201,000. Some of the questions under finance for training, the jump there. And again, I could put together a series of little 5 and 10K little pieces for you if you like, but certainly this is a team effort and a finance effort.
I think just generally, I think we would support that. If you would like to put something together for us, we could review that prior to our next meeting.
Well, actually, what I would ask, to be quite honest with you, is I'm certainly willing to work with people on this, particularly the city manager and the finance director, but ultimately they have the knowledge and the skill and the expertise I don't. So I would have to partner with them in doing that. I don't have enough knowledge of the line items to do that exclusively. I only have some notes I've written based on comments we've all shared. If they want to partner with me in doing that this week, I can certainly find time to do that. Although, as I shared, I'll be celebrating with my family on the other side of the country for most of this time. if you do make a decision this evening, so be it. If you don't, I look forward to working with you all further next Monday.
Thank you. Well, I think certainly we want to hear everybody's, yes, Mayor
I
Walters.
would just quickly add, yeah, first of all, Todd, congratulations to your family for another graduation. So proud of your girls. I think some of the HR stuff is STEM. Hold on, can you hear
Yeah,
me?
you were muted, Mayor.
No, I'm shopping.
I think things are coming back now.
Okay, am I back? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I have 10 kids on the internet in this house right now. Not 10, just 3, but it feels like 10. First of all, congratulations, Todd. I'm just proud of your. But what I would say is I think some of the money in HR is dedicated towards DEI. So I want to make sure that we preserve some of that funding. But absolutely, I know the staff would be willing to talk with you. And I agree with you. I think that, economic development is something in the city that we really need to focus on. So, I'm your partner in that. So let's work on that together. I sincerely agree. And I am not ready to vote on this budget tonight either. So thank you.
My apologies. I have to leave, friends. I wish you all the best. Perhaps I'll see you Monday. Take care.
Councilor Bialostowski, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, given the time and the amount of presentations left tonight, I didn't know if we'd get to the adoption, so I was planning to do that Monday, but I just wanted to say that for the record.
It does sound like that's where we're headed, is to not make a decision tonight. So with that, I think we can return to Lance, and we'll pick up with water, I think. Lance?
Yes, but outside of the general fund discussion and back into the utilities, the water fund is up next. I think big items in this upcoming budget, we did allocate potentially a bond sale for the water line relocation, the I-205 Abernathy Bridge. If anybody has been following that project, it looks like ODOT may move that project forward this year, and we'll need to have a signed agreement with them moving forward on that cost of relocation. When we originally located on the bridge, the city agreed to fund any relocation costs. And so ODOT's taking us up on that requirement and making us pay for the relocation of the water line. As well as any planned improvements. So that's the big ticket item of the water fund moving forward. The water fund is one of the funds that is limited in rate revenue increases by charter, and any increase over 5% would require a vote of the public. The water fund is probably, of all the funds, the most stressed utility fund, because there's a lot of need in the water capital for just basic maintenance. A lot of the old pipes are beyond their useful life, and we're patching them and holding them together, but they are impacting our ability to even do road improvements, because any road improvement over some of those old lines would actually break the water line underneath it. Water fund is certainly probably the most fiscally challenged of all the utility funds, strictly on a capital basis.
Any questions on this item?
Just
Sorry, go ahead, Abby.
Thank you again, Lance. Subject near and dear to my heart, having watched the Bolton Reservoir getting fixed, and, so pleased with the quality of our water, which I think is outstanding. It's the same question as before. You know, do you feel like as if there are enough funds in this next biennium that we're proposing to properly maintain or what we have, as well as account for emergencies?
Sure, the infusion of funds to build the Bolton Water Fund helped us immensely. The Bolton tank actually saved our bacon quite literally when the fires were occurring this last year. It's also saved us on a couple of other occasions. So nobody hears boil water notices in the city of West Linn because of that capital project. And because of our coordination with our surrounding water providers. So we've been very fortunate, I think, in that regard. If you actually look at the water master plan, we are underfunding. We are not keeping up with the needs of the water master plan, largely because of capital. And that's been an ongoing concern for as long as I've been here, quite honestly. And every time we talk about going to the rate payers for a fund increase, there's always something that makes that a difficult challenge. And is one of those things where most, as long as there's water coming out of the pipe, most people don't want to pay any more for it, right? So it's a difficult process, but certainly one that needs, I think, attention moving forward is the water fund.
What would it take? What are we talking? 3 million, 5 million, 10 million?
It's a structural rate issue in the water fund. The Utility Advisory Board actually provides recommendations to council in regards to the water utility as part of the charter requirement for the Utility Advisory Board. We do a lot of work with them on that. I think in the past, what we have projected to keep up would be more in the range of like, right now we're allowed to go up to a 5% increase. You would really need something like 2 sequential 10% increases or something like that. And there's a lot of ways to do that, to fund those kinds of improvements. Other options would be utility bonds through voter approval for specific capital projects like the upcoming I-205 project. We did not anticipate the I-205 project would be moving forward this quickly. And so that one sort of surprised us. That will have a significant impact on our ability to just do basic water line maintenance and repairs and replacements. So I think as far as this budget is concerned, we're in a good space, but long term, this will be an item that the council will need to consider and talk about, probably in coordination with the Utility Advisory Board over the next biennium.
Considering that we're facing a massive deficit in the next biennium and how critical water is for all of us, I'd like to suggest that we all think about this carefully. And are there things we can do now to, hearing things like we can't keep up with regular maintenance, to me is a scary statement. And should be a scary statement.
I think Lauren had a comment, and then we'll go to the mayor.
Yes, thank you. The UAB meets every fall with myself, and we go over the 20-year projections for the water fund. And for the past few years, we've known that the 20-year projection isn't looking great for the water fund. As Lance said, this biennium, we're looking okay in the water fund. Even next biennium, we're doing okay in the water fund. That is assuming that we do go out for a bond for the water line replacement this December. Go out for a bond, not a geo bond, just a full faith and credit or a revenue bond. But the UAB has talked significantly over the last 2 years about bringing a recommendation to council to go out to vote to increase the water rates above the 5% increase. They've tabled those discussions each time, especially with the pandemic, and it is a topic of when to do that vote, but that is definitely something that they're interested in doing, and that will probably be something coming to council in the near future, hopefully this year, because as Lance mentioned, this $6 million or potentially more for the water line replacement wasn't expected this biennium, and it kind of surprised us. Well, it definitely surprised me. So adding that in at the 11th hour, and figuring out how to fund that and how to get the bond for that and securing that funding is a pretty significant jump for us. So we probably will have to go out for a rate increase, if not other funding options like a geo bond.
Right, and currently, I think the city of Westland's water rates are lower than any in the Portland metro area. Just as an FYI. The one thing that is included, I think, in this budget round is the update to the city's water master plan, and so that will help identify those future needs and include all of the updates and changes that we've made since the last time the water master plan was updated, which I think was in 2008.
Next, let's go to Mayor Walters and then to Jerry.
All right, thank you, Chair. Quickly, I just wanted to ask Lance, so when you're talking about the water line replacement, are you talking about the pipe that is underneath the Abernathy Bridge?
Correct.
Okay, so you're talking about a size increase?
Potentially correct, yes.
Okay.
So that would be the water line basically within the ODOT right of way. That does not include the entire length of the water line to South Fork or any significant improvements inside the city limits, just the water line associated with the bridge work.
Okay, because I've also heard that and Council President Relia could probably correct me on this if he's listening in, but like, aren't we also responsible for the part of the pipe that goes to South Fork Water Board from the Abernathy Bridge up through Oregon City?
Yes, that is all part of our infrastructure. This South Fork takes over at the Division Street pump station, which is a significant distance into the city of Oregon City.
And have you, I'm sure you know better, you know everything, so you know better than me, but have you talked about using WIFIA funding for part of that project, and like if you were going to do the whole picnic basket, like as Abby was sort of asking, and if you don't want to give a full number, that's fine, but if you were going to do the whole picnic, what do you think that whole thing would cost?
Well, the water line actually between Westland and South Fork is actually not terrible. Now, obviously, it's not brand new. It's been there for a very long time. The part adjacent to the bridge has to be done because it is integral to the bridge. If you'll actually see it actually hangs between the two decks. There's actually two bridges there. I won't go into a big technical dissertation on it, but it is structurally part of the bridge. So we have to move that with the bridge. And then, of course, if we're moving it, we're planning for the future and we're making sure it's right sized to meet the needs of the city, basically for the next 100 years, because that pipeline will probably be there for a minimum of 50 years. I would say in today's world, probably closer to 100 years, assuming that the I-205 bridge doesn't get widened again between now and 100 years from now. The big capital need in the water fund is all of the old pipelines in the neighborhoods. So there are a lot of structurally inadequate water lines in existing neighborhoods that date back before I was born, obviously, that are quite old. Some of them that were built with less than superior quality material, and some of them that are really would just be a disaster if we had a major earthquake. So I think it's really all those little bits and pieces that combine to cause that cost to be significant. And that's what we utilize the master plan for. That's why we do all that analysis. In the long run, it's really, it's about rates. WIFA funds are really just federal government loans, and we're not in a community that would really qualify for any kind of principal forgiveness in that process. That kind of assistance is really for low income areas. But yes, we are pursuing all of those various grant funds, all of those various programs, anything that would reduce the cost burden to all of us as ratepayers, which includes myself as a ratepayer. So.
Thank you, Lance. And I'm just, for anybody that's listening, just so you know, that that main water line is under the Abernathy Bridge. It was installed when the Abernathy Bridge was put in place. So that's approximately 1970. So I was born in 1970, so I can tell you it's 50 years old. And Lance has said that there doesn't appear to be any asbestos or lead or anything concerning in it, just that it is reaching, well, it could be reaching toward the end of its lifespan. Is that correct?
And the big thing with that too is the one on the bridge, really, the goal is to make it seismically secure and resilient to match the bridge, because that's a really hard place to reach. If the existing water line cracks or something happens in a major seismic event between here and Oregon City, we can go out there and repair that. We can clamp that relatively expediently. It may be a big to do, but something that's manageable. If something cracks on the bridge, there's no easy way to fix that. You're not going to fix that in 24 hours. And so that one really has to be designed to meet the needs and match the design parameters of the bridge itself. And ODOT is planning on making improvements to I-205, a lot of details in the design, of course, but that bridge would be structurally stable in once ODOT's done with the project, which will probably take about 5 years, would be structurally stable to withstand a Cascadia level event.
Thank you. Let's go to Jerry now.
This is just a small comment, but there are, of that 5.4 million that we received in the American Rescue Plan, water and sewer infrastructure is an eligible expense. And as you can tell from this discussion, we could probably put all 5.4 million into that and not even make a dent in all of our needs. So.
Thank you. Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question for Lauren, and this may have already been said, but I was looking at the $6 million bond for this water line replacement. I was wondering what's the plan to pay that back? Is that a rate increase at this time, or?
No, so there's two different, there's technically 3 different types of bonds. One of them would be a geo bond, and that's what we go out for a vote of the citizens on, like our 2018 geo bond, and that is paid for by the citizens in their property tax bill, by their property tax rate. So later, either this meeting or next meeting, we'll vote on a rate, a property tax rate, and then a bonded debt levy amount. And that's how much we're levying to cover those geo bonds. So when the taxpayers say, yes, we want to vote on this, then we are able to pay that back with the tax levy. So that is assessed on each property. So that's a geo bond. There's also full faith and credit obligations, which are also bonds, and those are secured with the full faith and credit of the city's general funds. Obviously, we don't have a ton of extra in our general funds, so securing one of those currently is not super easy to do. The other type of bond, or one of the other types of bonds, is what we call a revenue bond. And it's similar to a full faith and credit, but it's, instead of it being secured by the general funds of the city, it's included, or it's secured by the revenues of the city, and water rate revenues are what we would be securing it by. So we're saying we will be using the water rate revenues to pay for this bond. And so therefore, it wouldn't necessarily be an increase. It would just be a portion of our water rate revenues going towards paying off that bond. Likely, we would need an increase in those rates over the 5% in order to pay off that bond and do maintenance that we need to do. So currently, it's in here as $6 million coming in. And then under the debt service line item, we'll start paying for that. That's why that number jumps up significantly in fiscal year 23, because we'll be paying the debt service, or it's a rough estimate, because obviously I don't know what the debt service schedule will look like, but we'll be paying that debt service over time, over a 20-year period from the water revenues. Alternatively, if we were able to get this on the ballot by November, we could go out for a GO bond for that, but that would be a very tight turnaround in order to get that done in the next month or two, to get that on the ballot and get the education out there to the citizens of why we need to increase tax rates for that amount. So it's usually better to secure it with the revenue bond. Hopefully we will get a good rate on a revenue bond and secure it with the revenues of the water fund.
Thank you. These are just
Yeah.
tough conversations to have. It's our infrastructure competing with tax dollars, and it's my last follow-up is just, so it's your position that the 5% cap is not sustainable long term, because I know I learned recently that Oregon City is doing a ballot measure to remove their 5% cap. And so what's your position? Is that the cap is not sustainable for the budget?
Yeah, I don't think it would be, just because if you look at the 20-year forecast, we're just not doing the water line replacements that we need to be doing, and that's because we don't have the rates. If you look at our water rates in comparison to all the other cities, as Lance said, they are the lowest of all the surrounding jurisdictions. So in the back of your binders, there's a master fees and charges schedule. And on page 7 of that schedule, it's comparing the monthly utility bills. A top line item is water. And you can see that this is for approximately 10 CCFs of water. Our base bill includes 7 CCFs, and we're at about $35 a month. The next lowest is Tualatin, I believe, at $41 a month. That's a pretty big jump, $6 per household per month. We have about 8,500 households here, so that would be about $600,000, over $600,000 a year, just that $5 jump. So, and obviously these are very rough calculations, but having that 5% cap is really challenging for the water fund, and I know Lance could speak more on that. But yeah, we definitely have been deferring maintenance and plan on.
We've lost you, Lauren. Not hearing you. Maybe try turning off your camera for
Am
just a
I
moment.
back?
Now you're back.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Especially after we do the revenue bond for the $6 million, that will eat more of our rate amount. to cover the debt service on that. So we'll have even less money to do our repairs with if we don't increase that amount.
Okay, next up, I think, was Councilor Aurelia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Got my camera off there in order to save bandwidth, so hopefully everybody can hear me. So my question to Director Calvert is regarding the water line going over the Abernathy Bridge. When we received the overview from ODOT regarding that replacement project, they gave us a $2 million, a $4 million, and a $6 million option. And as Mayor Walters mentioned, I then started asking questions about where's the line in the sand where our responsibility for a pipeline started. And you indicated earlier that that was at the Division Street pump station, which is on the Oregon City side of the border. And then, of course, we have from the Abernathy Bridge up to the Bolton Reservoir. So as we start talking about a bond measure for the mainline water improvements, I just want to make sure that we're also including a discussion about that Division Street to the Abernathy Bridge and from the Abernathy Bridge up to the Bolton Reservoir. And I haven't heard a lot of discussion about what the condition of those pipes are in those different sections and what type of dollars we would need in order to address those improvements.
Sure. So obviously there'd be a lot, I think a lot more to come on the water line discussion that goes beyond what's included in the budget. Certainly there could be a budget adjustment or amendment if necessary. I think when ODOT put together their original 246 estimates, they missed the mark, quite honestly, in what that actually costs. The $2 million estimate was strictly a replacement of the pipe in the midsection of the bridge. And they didn't really understand that when they came up with that 2 million calculation, they assumed that they could shut down our water line for almost a year and then put it back into service when after the bridge was shifted over. And obviously that's not acceptable. So to keep the water line active throughout the entire construction window of the bridge, it actually costs quite a bit more because there'll be a need for a temporary line to make a connection. Can't interfere with the deck construction, and so it gets really expensive actually quite fast just in the bridge itself. ODOT is currently working on that design. We plugged that number into this year because ODOT was pushing for a construction start on I-205, on the I-205 bridge in 2022. But the water line work will not actually be until probably 2 to 3 years later. The problem is we have to give them our percentage of the project or our money up front. So there will be a lot of IGA and negotiation between ODOT and the city on that front moving forward that will be coming forward to the council. So a lot of complexity, but as far as the budget goes, I think we've got the right numbers plugged in for now, and that I would anticipate multiple work sessions with the council to go over and review all the work that's included in that corridor. Like I said, we're also updating and planning to update the water master plan. And so there'll be additional opportunities there to talk about the line, not just associated with the bridge, but all the way to the Division Street pump station, as well as the neighborhood infrastructure. I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess the answer is more to come.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Calvert. I'll look forward to those further discussions.
Abby, did you have another question?
I don't think so. I think Lance made it clear in his answers and the questions that I had as well.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Walters, your hand is raised also.
Yeah, I just had a couple of general questions. Well, first, I just wanted to tell anybody that if they want to tour the Public Works facility, I think Lance would be amenable to doing that. It's very small. It's plunked in the middle of the Sunset neighborhood surrounded by homes. And it doesn't really have the space for them to buy things in quantity like, you know, de-icing, you know, like whatever it's called. So they end up, it's kind of like going to the corner store to buy things for a large group instead of going to Costco or whatever, you know, so it's definitely not ideal. So I recommend anybody taking a look at that. But I had a specific question for Lance, and I brought it up 2 years ago at the last biennium. It's about a local gas fuel tax. And I know fuel tax revenues have gone down as electric vehicle purchases have gone up. But I think as we look at how many people who are not West Linn community members and residents travel through our main corridors, and with diversion, which we will expect to increase should tolling be implemented, which is looking more like it might happen, you know, would it be a reasonable revenue source to implement a local gas tax so that people who are using their roads, our roads, are giving money back to our street fund? And I'm interested to hear Lance's opinion on that. Thank you.
Sure. So local gas tax is always an option for a local community. I think the trick is just what does that generate? And so I'm sure that's something that we could explore. You know, I just back of the cocktail napkin kind of analysis. If we had a Costco in town and I had a huge gas station that would generate a ton of revenue, I'd be advocating for that. But we don't have a Costco in town. Our gas stations are quite small. So I don't know how much that would really generate, but it is always an item that could be explored.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any more questions on, where were we, on water? Seeing nothing. Okay, Lance, move on to environmental services, please.
Yeah, page 92, so we're cruising right along if we skip a bunch of pages. Sorry the water discussion took so long, but there's some big things happening there. Our environmental services fund is our sanitary sewer collection system, as well as our stormwater infrastructure. We maintain most of the detention retention ponds in the community inside Public Works. This is where all of our storm catch basin cleaning is paid for. This is what pays for all of our pump stations to transport sewage to the Tri-City West treatment plant in Oregon City. So all of that kind of infrastructure lands here. I would mention we just completed a sewer and storm master plan update in this biennium, and now we're moving towards implementation and construction of some of those capital improvements. Luckily, the sewer fund, I think, is actually our environmental services fund is actually our healthiest fund. So you'll see moving forward a drawdown in capital expenditures. We sort of paused that a little bit because our sewer master plan was last updated in 1999. And so updating it this year, past biennium has sort of shown a light on a lot of our defects. A lot of our pump stations need quite a bit of work all along the river, and there are some INI, what we call INI problems, or inflow and infiltration problems that basically are leaks in the pipe that then basically transport groundwater to the treatment plant, and the treatment plant ends up having to treat the groundwater, which is not desirable from a treatment plant operation perspective. So more infrastructure investment on the old infrastructure in town. Some of the, particularly in a lot of the older neighborhoods, Sunset in particular is a neighborhood that has a lot of poor sewage infrastructure, and will need quite a bit of work moving forward. And we're currently in design on some of those projects. Be happy to answer any questions in this fund if there are any.
Any questions? Yes, Abby?
Sorry about that. Same question as before. You know, this is it, you said that we're in good shape with this fund. Do you feel like you've got enough to support what needs to be done, or do we have infrastructure problems similar to the water fund?
I think here we're doing much better than the water fund. This is also a rate constrained fund, so no increases above 5%. I think we started out, quite honestly, in a better place with rates in the sewer fund. There's some other dynamics as far as Wes's rates are not tied to our rates in the sewer fund, so that helps quite a bit. The water fund's actually unique. It's, again, I'm sort of backtracking, but the water fund South Fork rates are actually tied and buried into our rates, and so you don't see those separated out in the water fund. So anytime there's a significant increase at South Fork, it's a cascading effect in the water fund. Whereas with the sewer fund, that is not the case with Wes. So I think in general, sewer's doing fine. If you ask the sewer staff, they would like more staff. But we are keeping up with things. You know, there's always needs for drainage. Usually nobody thinks about it until we have a major flood event, and then it becomes front page news. But with the master plan work that we recently completed, I think we've got a pretty good sense of what's going on and how to move forward in this fund.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Would
Seeing
note
none,
that
Lance?
our most expensive piece of equipment is actually in this fund, $500,000 sewer jetter. Hopefully, we'll have that delivered. It's programmed in this year for replacement. Our old jetter, I believe, is going to Malala. They're buying that from us. But the new one should show up here soon. And if any, you know, just like if anybody wants a tour of the yard, happy to take you on a tour of the sewer system, and you can watch a giant vacuum suck a bunch of trouble out of the sewer line. So if anybody's interested, but I don't know if anybody finds that fun, but it's certainly an impressive piece of equipment.
Everyone's favorite field trip.
Yeah. Jerry's volunteering.
All right.
We could get you on dirty jobs.
Can I drive the truck on this? Is that a perk of the
No.
job? Oh, okay.
I don't think anybody really realizes how important that piece of equipment is until you have a water line break and you need to use that in order to do excavation work to reach the broken pipeline. And at that point, that vacuum truck becomes the most vital piece of equipment that you have out in the field. So we were glad to support that purchase.
Yeah, and definitely. And if there's ever, you know, please don't flush disposable wipes. You know, like you'll hear Wes say that all the time. Those are not really biodegradable. They don't work well in the sewer system, and we don't want to see backups in somebody's basement because of a bunch of wipes. So, and that's where that big piece of equipment comes in real handy also.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lance. So any other questions? Okay, now I think we're ready to move on, Lance, to SDCs.
Sure. SDCs really cover all the associated utility funds, streets, Bike pedestrian is basically affiliated with streets, is separated out per our transportation system plan and state statute. Water SDCs, wastewater and surface water SDCs, all located from basically pages 96 with parks to page 101 in your budget binder. These are developer contributions based on what our state law allows for contributions that are tied to our master plans. And they fund expansions or improvements beyond maintenance that are related to development. So development pays its fair share according to state statute, and we typically do our best to capture that in any new development moving forward. I'll leave to Lauren maybe to explain some of the financial elements or issues around SDCs if you want to hear any of that. But basically, these funds largely help fund our capital improvements and capital outlays and pay, for, like I said, for that portion of those improvements.
All right, any questions on SDCs? I just had one quick one, Lance. I assume these are subject to the same vagaries as the park SDCs as well, as far as you never know for sure when you're going to be getting them and what the amounts are going to be. Is that true?
Correct. So you can't spend SDCs until you have them on hand. There's a lot of limitations about SDCs and how we collect them. Other thing I would mention is SDCs have been diminishing in the city of West Linn as we move towards largely build out. Unless there's a significant change in zoning or upzoning or something like that, you'll see SDCs slowly whittle down over time as development slows in the community.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, why don't we move on to the GO bond, please?
You want to start that one, Lauren, or do you want me to?
I think that we can kind of do that one in conjunction with your capital projects because a majority of it is capital projects. The GO bond fund is we're just spending down the revenue from the GO bond. That's why you'll see those beginning balances decreasing over time. We do have some interest coming into the fund. Obviously, that's declining too because of a few factors, mostly because our balance is declining, also because the amount of interest that we're getting on our investments is decreasing over the last couple of years, and that those funds are held within the LGIP. And then I'll let Lance talk about the capital outlay line for the transportation.
So I think attached to the budget is the CIP, as well as I think there's a breakdown in your attached to the meeting information on the website. The one that's on the website is a little hard to read. Hopefully we can get that in a better format, but for the public. But in general, capital projects and public works span all of the utility funds. We project out capital projects in our 6-year capital improvement plan. Same with parks. There's each section is identified and associated with each individual basic fund. So like the street capital would go with the street fund. Obviously, parks capital goes with park fund. And in the CIP inventory, you'll see what is funded and unfunded. Most of our capital projects are often unfunded because they're forward-looking projections or forward-looking potential items. The funded projects are also listed and are broken down by how they're sourced or paid for. So some projects may have multiple sources of funds where they might be getting funds from the bond, they may be getting funds from fees or system development charges. I don't know if there's anything in specific that I would call out in any of this capital improvement funds. I'm happy to answer any questions about any one project. Most of them are fairly self-explanatory, I think. Like I said, we do have some funding in there for preliminary design for our operations facility. Hopefully we can find a good site for something like that. The majority of your street funds really goes to pavement maintenance and street maintenance. And then we will also oftentimes match in with any developments that might be occurring around town. So an example of that would be the Tanner Ridge subdivision, where Tanner Ridge subdivision did the improvements on the south side of Rosemont Road. And then we partnered with them to complete the improvements on the north side of the road adjacent to private property that was beyond what we could get the subdivision to legally pay for. And we worked with them to facilitate that so that we would utilize our local tax dollars as efficiently as possible so that we're getting the best bang for our buck with the limited funds that we have. Like I said, I don't know if there's anything in this particular list that stands out to anybody, but I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the capital projects listed.
Abby?
Thank you so much, Lance. I guess because the whole issue with our water system and the infrastructure concerns me. After hearing this, I notice I'm on page 139 that there's an annual deteriorated line replacement of, I assume that's 800,000. That's not in, or is that in eight? But it seems pushed off to 24, 25, 26, yet it's funded. So are we just going to continue not to do that, or do we have funding sources from other places?
So yeah, so the tiered line replacement, we are projecting in future years to have funds available in a relatively small amount to do some of that work. But in this current biennium, it's really about matching the I-205 water line replacement project, as well as the those system improvement projects. I almost see the annual deteriorated line projects and the system improvement projects as being really one and the same, because we're not just oftentimes we're not replacing them kind for kind. So kind for kind replacement would mean in a deteriorated line replacement program would mean like we're replacing a 6-inch failed water line or nearly failing water line with a new 6-inch water line. The system improvement projects would include most of what we do, where a lot of our failing system is substandard. So in that, most of our replacement projects are actually more like we're replacing a 2-inch galvanized line with no fire hydrants with a new 8-inch ductile iron line with fire hydrants and adequate fire suppression capability. So that would sort of be more of an extreme example of system improvements. So you could almost collapse those two into a single line, but it's really all about adequate fire flow, adequate service to individual homes and businesses, and replacing a lot of those old pieces of infrastructure.
Is there anything in here that you would like to push sooner into the current biennium?
I mean, obviously, if we had, more funds, I think what I would like to see move forward are things like upgrading our older reservoirs for seismic repair and assessment. I think there's, if you look at some of our ground-mounted tanks, like the one along Salamo or the one off of Santa Anita, there's really no seismic improvements there. Typically what happens in those kinds of tanks is the seismic will shift the tank, could punch a water line that feeds the tank through the tank and cause a lot of damage and destruction. So there's ways to mitigate that. Those kinds of improvements, when you're a public works director, you always worry about the worst case scenario. And so those kinds of things I would always like to see done. There's just, again, things that I think as we go through the water master plan update, there'll be opportunities for those kinds of conversations to say, okay, what is the important things that we want to fund and how are we going to do that?
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Lance? Yes, Councilor Bialostowski.
Just a quick question about, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question about the operations facility in this CIP. It says funded by fees / SDC. So I guess this may be for the next biennium, but I'm just trying to plan ahead. How big of a fee increase would it be to put $10 million into the operations plan? I mean, because that seems like a potentially big fee, and I don't want to get into the situation where we're raising fees now, we raise them too much, and then it becomes super unpopular to raise fees. Because I understand that a lot of people feel like taxes are high. So even though they're maybe not proportionate to what Westland residents are actually paying, people feel that way. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that $10 million number, because that does stand out to me in the CIP.
Yeah, so the operations facility is unique in that it would actually be funded by multiple funds. So that cost would be spread across streets, the environmental fund, which is storm and sanitary, as well as water, and potentially parks. If parks co-locates there, obviously they're co-located in our operations facility today. You'd also have some offsetting revenue from assumably the sale of the old site, unless somebody wanted to keep that site for some other public purpose. So those are all conversations that I think have to occur. And remember that we wouldn't just absorb all that in 1 year. It would be most likely another bond or debt service issuance, because you would want to fund that over at least the initial life of the facility, much like the police department, the police station is funded. So I think there's again a whole nother litany of conversations there and potential work sessions as we move forward. But yeah, I mean it's a necessary part of the job, but it's also our job to try and find equitable ways to make that work for the residents that are funding all of these improvements through their utility bill, and we want to be very conscious of that. I fund that bill too, so I'm probably one of those people that I know my wife is like, I don't want to pay this bill. But I'm sure we'll figure it out.
Any other questions for Lance? I think, Lance, this is the end of your presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry I took so long. Sorry to Ken. I'm sure he wished he went before me, but I appreciate your all's time. And if you ever have any questions, please follow up with me. And again, if you want any tours, or if any citizen that's out there wants a tour or a conversation, I'm happy to facilitate that.
Well, thank you, Lance. We appreciate all your work for the city and your presentation tonight. Great job. So with that, I think we can move on to item 6C, Parks, and let's start off with the Parks Fund. Ken?
Thank you, Chair and City Council and Board. Boy, Lance covered a lot of ground there. First of all, I want to thank all of you and those of you specifically earlier who recognized Parks and Rec as an essential service for a city. A lot of Parks and Rec's department don't get that respect, and we certainly appreciate it. It's been a trying 15 months for Parks and Rec through the pandemic, wildfires, ice storms, and some of our numbers reflect that, where we had some savings because we couldn't do a lot in the past year. But as most of you know, our job is to provide life-enhancing experiences and promote a healthy community. We do that through providing safe, attractive, and well-maintained parks, facilities, trails, open spaces, and also providing for our community creative and challenging recreation and sports programs for all ages of our community. So we'll start with the Parks and Recreation Fund, which is on page 72. Our personnel right now, which we discussed, is at 22.75 full-time equivalents. On the recreation side, we have about 5.5 employees. Challenges there, one of the main challenges, our adult community center, which is a 9,000 square foot facility, has one FTE, which is put together right now by 2 fabulous part-time employees. On the maintenance side, we talked about, we have 8 employees. We have 1 city arborist who deals with tree issues, street trees, tree removal permits, and trees in our parks, probably about 90% of their job. We have 1 park ranger, which is 0.25 FTE. This individual does not have enforcement authority like our community resource officers with the police, but they do, work in our parks part-time. We have seasonal or temporary employees. We have 7 FTEs. But really what this comes down to is an actual dollar amount that we have, that we can hire and spend that amount of money. So it does come out to about roughly 14,000 hours, which is great to have that ability throughout the year. As we discussed, we have 1 additional park maintenance worker in the budget. Most of our resources, I think, comes from property taxes, the park maintenance fee that we discussed, and the one other large one is our recreation event and facility rentals, which includes the adult community center, Sunset Fire Hall, and about 11 different shelters in our parks. We also have athletic fields that have the ability to be rented by groups, but they are utilized about 95% of the time available by our local youth sports organizations. So we provide those for them. So we jump down to major line items. So our personnel services is about $1.9 million each year. Regular employee salaries is about 50% of that. Seasonal and temporary employees is about 10%, and all the benefits come to about 40%. Under our materials and services, we're kind of the department that spends $1.1 million a dollar at a time. We have a lot of line items that you don't see in the actual budget. Some of the larger ones are recreation programs and events are 300,000. We have utilities about 155,000. Park maintenance, where basically we do everything in our parks, taking care of them, about 190,000. We have insurance for property and liability at 50,000. We provide services for Meals on Wheels, transportation through the Pioneer Community Center in Oregon City at about 44,000. And costs just drop from there all the way down to smaller numbers of what we do. As far as our capital outlay in this biennium, we have equipment at about $110,000 in the first year. That's basically 2 vehicles to be replaced, large trucks that were purchased in 2002 and 2007. We have 1 to be replaced in 2023, year 2. Our park projects under capital, We have very few, but they're very important. Every year we have $10,000 to make ADA improvements to all of our facilities so that those with any type of disability can still access what we have available. We have $15,000 in capital maintenance money. And what that is just keeping up all the amenities we have as things age. We have to replace them and just work on them. A lot of playground equipments and different things that may get broken throughout the year. And the last one is about every 5 years, we have to put money into our skate park. The concrete coping, which across the top, which is called pool coping, where they grind with their pegs on bikes and their skateboards. It starts to just chip away a little bit. And as one of our most used amenities in our park system, it's great to be able to put a little money into that facility. So I'll leave it there as a Parks and Rec fund if we have questions there.
Any questions for Ken on that topic? Ken, I'm not seeing any. Feel
Okay.
free to proceed.
So the next fund
I'm sorry.
we have.
I'm sorry, Ken. Abby, did you have a question?
Yep, just getting back again to, the staffing and, how we compare to other cities that have facilities, and that I think you expressed that it's not enough given the amount of parks we have and what we've been adding.
Correct. We are on the low side, most definitely. Parks and Rec is one of those unique funds that is sometimes difficult to compare city to city. If we look at Lake Oswego, we don't like to because they have a huge tax rate, but they also have a golf course, tennis center. Oregon City, has a pool, they have a cemetery. So we're really unique businesses. So sometimes it's hard to compare, but as far as acreage goes and the amenities we've built, we're certainly on the lower end of staffing.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ken? Yes, Councilor Bialystowski.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one to follow up on the earlier discussion that Lance had made a point that there was some concern if we added another maintenance worker on top of the one we're adding, that there may not be space at the operations center. And I was just wondering if you could address that. When I think of a parks maintenance worker, I think of them out in the field to an extent. So I don't know the tension there. And I was just wondering if there's, if you agree with Lance, or if you think that it's possible to have additional maintenance worker on staff. Could you discuss that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree with Director Calvert. Our operations facility is inadequate for the number of people that we have there. It's difficult. Our park maintenance staff are kind of, in 2 rooms that are 10 by 15. There's 8 of them. A lot of times, they'll meet outside or undercover, because it's hard to squeeze everybody into the room. The lunchroom, isn't adequate if we want to get everybody in there from both of our departments. It's a challenge, but I would have to say that we're certainly willing to work with that if a park maintenance worker can be added. I think, for us, that's a sacrifice, but a bonus at the same time. There are other things to consider with vehicles and things. And if we're able to add staff, I think, you can start to pair people up a little and focus in different areas, like Lance talked about, having a little more specialized staff. So there's a little downside, Councilor Bialystowski, but we'll certainly take that with a staff member.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Okay, Ken, please proceed.
So the next budget that falls under Parks and Recreation is our city facilities budget, which is on page 48. And what this contains is 1 FTE, which is our facilities maintenance coordinator. That's certainly lower than any other city around us. This one person manages and inspects and oversees our 9 facilities. We have City Hall, the police station, operations building, library, adult community center, Sunset Fire Hall, Historic City Hall, Ravelwood Station, Bolton Fire Hall. The one facility that is not under this budget is the Historic McLean House. I mean, actually, it has a small line item in our Parks and Rec budget, but that doesn't mean that our facilities person doesn't help out there, because he has the expertise and it has some of the same systems, although some of them antiquated, that our modern buildings do. So this fund, in your budget, it lists, utilities, facilities, other purchase services, and repairs and maintenance. And when we look at each of the buildings, what the line items that broken down a little more, what we're dealing with are equipment repairs, actual facility repair work. Most of these facilities have custodial services that are coming between 3 and 5 days a week. We have facility maintenance supplies for all of our HVAC systems, for the custodial services and all of those things. We have security alarm services at most of them. A number of them have elevators and or small lifts. And then we have all of the utilities that come with these buildings. So that's where we really get that complete budget. If we have any questions there, I'd be more than willing to answer those.
Any questions on that topic? Yes, Sheila Waldron.
Thank you. I just have a question. With the art funds, is there any opportunity to enhance any of the facilities, city facilities, specifically like the HVAC and the airflow, using those funds?
I think that's a great question for Lauren, to be honest. I haven't been involved in looking at what qualifies there yet. I've kind of been stuck in storm recovery still, but hopefully Lauren can answer that a little bit.
I definitely think there might be a potential. I would need to read more in detail. It would have to be related to COVID-19, I believe. I think with the art funds, that's definitely something that we'll be bringing back to council in the next month to kind of go through that allocation of where the funding is going to go, and potentially budget committee if they're interested. But there could be a potential for that if that's something that is needed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mayor Walters? We may have lost Mayor Walters. Not hearing you, Jules. Okay, let's go ahead and move on unless there's other questions on this topic. Okay, Ken?
Great, thank you. So the next fund to take a look at is our Parks Systems Development Charges funds. And I think Director Calvert explained very well. These are developer driven. As development occurs, it pays for itself. Currently, our Systems Development Charges Fund in Parks has a balance of about $310,000. Each single-family residence pays about $12,200. Our multifamily pays about $8,600 into our fund. One of the things that has complicated this a little bit most recently is that developers used to pay as the homes were built. Now they can actually finance their SDC payments. So that makes it even a little more unpredictable for when the city's actually going to receive the funds. Even though we see a lot of development happening around town, we're not sure when we're going to get it. Our projected 2-year budget is about $135,000. Roughly, we are currently in the process of reviewing and can potentially update our systems development charges. We're not there yet, but we have been working with a consultant for about the past 5 months. We really only have 2 projects in our current biennium, and that's due to lack of anticipated funds. The first one is Maddox Woods, which is had replaced, put in a sewer line. It's scheduled to have a driveway put in. They have a gravel driveway now, and our French group have been waiting about 8 years to put in a boat barn. It kind of reflects the history of the property when Virgil Maddox used to actually build boats on the property. The other project with a little bit of funds is the Willamette River Trail that we are anticipating moving forward this year and next year. So if we have any questions on SDCs, I can certainly answer those.
Anybody with any questions? I had a couple real quick, Ken. You said you're going to be updating the funds. Do you mean with the potential possibility of increasing the SDC amount, or?
Yeah, so we've been working with a consulting firm to look at all of our systems development charges, not only parks, but all those on Director Calvert's side, all of those utility funds over there. And it does appear that there's a potential that we could increase our systems development charges funds based on the studies that they're doing. That's a process that we go through and kind of figure out where it can work out based on the legal ability to raise those. And that is based kind of on all those projects that we have listed in our capital improvements program, even for those parks projects down at the bottom that are very big projects that we're going to do someday. All that's factored into the SDC formulas by the consulting firm, and they'll eventually kind of let us where we're at, and we'll have the potential to raise those, and that will happen hopefully later this fall.
Okay, great, thank you. And then also on the amounts right now, I think I heard you say single family home is roughly $12,000 and a multifamily is $8,600. I may not have those numbers exactly correct, but I'm surprised that multifamily is less than single family. Is that per dwelling in multifamily, or is that for the whole multifamily project?
It is per dwelling, per dwelling, and it's a calculation based on a number of things, but average number of people per home and a number of calculations.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions on SDCs? No. Okay, Ken, you're a go.
So the next one is our Go Bond projects, and Director Calvert, this is on page 103. It doesn't go into a lot of detail there. It just has the dollar amounts. In 2018, 44 projects at 8 different sites were approved by City Council for our parks portion of the 1/3, well, of the 3 buckets of money, not necessarily 1/3. We have completed a lot of those smaller ones through the pandemic. We have some of the larger ones to go. And do we want to, or would you like to talk about those specifically, or do you want to just generally and go down to capital improvements, talk about them as a whole?
I would be inclined to say the latter. Yeah, just
Okay. So on the same page, the second piece that is managed by Parks and Recreation is the second of the 3 pools of money, which is Go Bond facilities. We started with projects at 8 of our 9 facilities, and some of the projects are done. We've installed generators and all types of things. We do have very large projects to complete still. So I guess the last thing we can walk through is our capital improvement plan, which is on page 137. And starting at the top, the general capital improvement projects are predominantly managed by the Parks and Recreation Department, as they are within our Go Bond or their facilities. The Go Bond projects in this category are going to have some serious decisions to be made in the future. As these were all projected, the bigger projects for facilities were projected with costs in December of 2019 and approved by council in February of 20. We've got some new cost estimates on some of the bigger projects, and due to the pandemic, shortages of supply chain issues, we're gonna have to have serious conversations about the money being spent. We have some serious issues to deal with. In my opinion, our Sunset Fire Hall is a heavily used facility 7 days a week for our recreation programs and nonprofits outside of the pandemic. We found out last year as we looked to renovate restrooms, it was never recategorized as a Category A community meeting facility. So we are required to put fire suppression sprinklers inside that facility. We budgeted 60,000, and the bids so far came back at about 85. City Hall has some serious needs for HVAC systems. We don't know if there's enough money there. We have about 5 units on top of City Hall. As we know, the historic City Hall is a major renovation projected at 1.2 million as of 2020. Robinwood Station is a large renovation also projected at about 700 in 2020. So do we have any questions on that portion?
Any questions? Nope.
No, but Ken, I just want to point out that I've had this small heater in my office because the HVAC system has never worked. And it's been the subject of conversation between me and the mayor for quite some time.
Yeah, it depends where you are in the building, whether you're warm or cold.
Yes, Abby?
Yes, thank you so much, Ken. When you would say that there are serious issues to discuss, with what body do you need to discuss them with? Is this city council or is it us?
Well, it's potentially both. I mean, the situation we're in, I guess, Abby, is we have of the two large projects we have left, Historic City Hall and Robinwood Station. We have one of those cost estimates back from our architect, and it went up 30%, which is the Robinwood Station. Historic City Hall, we haven't got it back yet. He's working on it right now. So they're significant. Robinwood Station went up 30% and now has a projected cost of $930,000. Like I say, Historic City Hall, we're not sure yet. But it's going to, it is a budgeting issue, but the money's there with the GO bond. And so, the question is, where does it get spent? And I don't, where that decision gets made is I guess, going to be between, the budget committee and council.
Okay. And is that something we should pin to our docket that we have to do within the next 2 weeks or no?
That's a process question I don't know the answer to. Maybe Lauren or Jerry would weigh in on that one.
I think there's a couple ways of handling this. Obviously, the budget is a fluid document. Things are going to change. It's a 2-year biennial document, and things are going to change from now until the end of this biennium. We don't even have the information yet about how much the other building is going to be. So I think at this point we say, this is what council and the budget committee in the past has allocated the funds to. And as we get that new information, we can come back to council throughout the year and say, let's make this decision on how we're going to reallocate this funding when we have the full information.
Okay. Do we have the full a jump from 700,000 for Robin Hood to 930,000 is, in the biggest picture, not, somewhat smaller, but it's not insignificant. Should, we say, okay, something we have to do before we approve this budget, or just not sure about the process?
No, And like I said, I think that it's, obviously we have that in there, but we just don't have 200,000 or 250,000 extra in this. So I think right now you approve it as is and what we expected. And then when we get the full information, and as projects continue, we've always known with GeoBond funding that there's going to be a moving target, and we're going to have to reassess as time goes on and as projects change. So I think the biggest things to note are, the changes that we've already made in the document that I sent out earlier, those 2 highlighted ones. But it doesn't change the bottom line. It doesn't change the actual budget numbers of what we're going to spend in the next couple of years. It just changes the CIP more than anything. And the council is ultimately in charge of approving the CIP in June. At that point, well, we probably won't change it because our budget numbers will already be set, but there might be a chance that they change the allocation a little bit. Or throughout.
And they're simply, you're moving things around within this overall, because the geo bond's the geo bond. You've already sent it out. It's already funded, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
The only reason why that got changed in the CIP was council voted to move that to a different funding source. So I just changed it to reflect that in there, but I didn't change any of the numbers, if that makes sense.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Sorry? Nope. Okay, any other questions for Ken? Seeing none, Ken, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and your effort. Again, I'll say the same as I said to Lance, you're doing a great job and we appreciate it. So with that, based on comments earlier tonight that several people are not ready to approve the budget this evening, and certainly with Councilor Jones being unavailable right now. Yes, Ann?
I just wondered if Ken had actually finished going through the CIP with respect to Parks capital improvement. Did you want to, we only talked really about general capital improvement projects, I think. Did you want to say anything about the Parks capital improvement projects? The second 2/3 of that page.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can. The Parks capital improvement projects, the next section we really talked about. Those are what we call fees. Those are actually in our budget for Parks and Recreation Fund that we discussed. The one thing we've put in here that's never been here really is capital improvement projects, and just kind of putting some placeholders out there that even as a Parks Department, we are going to have some major expenses down the road to replace some of our infrastructure. We also have some grant projects that are projected out a couple of years. The last section kind of is the SDC fund along with the GO bond. So SDC we talked about, we have 2 projects for the next 2 years. The rest of those are qualified for systems development charges, new expansion projects. It's just a matter of when the funds come in. The GO bond projects for parks, as I said, we started with 44 projects at 18 different sites. We went through a lot of those. These are listed for you, I think, by park. They don't have a lot of detail unless you looked a little more at these projects. I can certainly add any information you'd like if we have questions on what's really happening at these parks right now or in the future.
I saw Councilor Bialystowski first, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to circle back for 1 second to the general capital improvements because a question came to my mind. So this old City Hall cost estimate of 1.285 million, when was that from? And do you anticipate that when the new one comes back, it's going to be higher as well? I'm just trying to prepare myself for the future as we move forward with this. I mean, do you anticipate that 1.285 may as well rise just as Robinwood did when you got the estimate back?
Yeah, both of the original cost estimates that the previous council approved were from February of 2020, pre-pandemic. So, I would anticipate it's going to go up. Until we get that information from the architect, when we look at wood is up 300%, steel's up, but how much of those products are going to be put into, this construction project versus Robinwood, I don't know. So, I would guess it's going to go up some, but I don't know if it would be the, same percentage.
Okay. Abby, I think you had a question.
Thank you very much, Ed. Ken, again, thank you for going through these and answering these questions. Also, thank you for, completing a bunch of the bond fund projects, including one near and dear to my neighborhood association, Sahali Ilahi Park, and we're going to have a great opening for it when things are open again. So thank you on that. One that's very specific actually to our neighborhood. I've heard from a couple of neighborhood association members that Oppenlander Field might be getting sold, that it's owned by the Department of Education. And is there anything to that matter? Do this as a city see this as an opportunity to obtain more park space? I realize that under the capital improvement plan, there's 0 for future community parks and everything else, but was just curious about that, if this wasn't if there's truth to this matter, and also if this is a potential use of funds for the city.
Well, I know the district has had that property for a long time. I know specifically that they don't really have a use for it. It's really, used for the past, probably almost decade, just by local youth sports. And I think the Lions still have a garage full of things on the site. We certainly don't have any funds in this budget, to buy something like that. It's a 10-acre piece of property that probably has a nice value to it, I would assume.
Great, but there's been no talk with the city by the Department of Education about selling it, or again, I've heard from a few members, so I wasn't sure.
Abby, I got your email and I meant to
Great.
respond. I'm sorry for jumping in here, but I need to look into a couple of things and get back to you and the group on
Great.
that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Ken? Ken, I apologize for cutting you off early there. So, anything else? All right, so as I was saying, I think we're at a point now where we could pause for the evening and then resume on the following next Monday, the 24th, with our deliberations and vote on the budget. So any objection to that plan? Lauren?
Just one question, or I don't know if this could be short and sweet, but if there are things that you think that we're going to deliberate on Monday night that you're really interested in adding to the budget or making changes, if you could please send me an email or send the group an email, or actually just send me an email so it's not me and Jerry, an email so that we are able to plug those numbers in. I want to make sure that on Monday night, if we do get to a point of a vote, that I have the right number. And that entails adding things to budget and moving things around and making sure that the bottom line number is the number that we're approving. So if there are things that you think that we're going to talk about changing, and of course I'll get with Councillor Jones to make sure that I know exactly what his changes are looking like, so we can have different scenarios on Monday night.
Okay, I see a couple hands up. So Mayor Walters.
Thank you. I think actually the council president was first, Council President Ronier.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. Councilor Aurelia?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Lauren and Jerry, we've heard a lot of discussion about wanting to address legal services. So I'd like to bring some context to the discussion when we meet next time. Because I believe, Lauren, that you mentioned that to bring an in-house attorney in would cost somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 250,000.
Approximately,
And we heard
yes.
that we heard that legal services jumped up to 400,000. But if we already had 200 or 250,000 allocated for in-house legal services, and we're only outsourcing our normal 200,000, well, obviously the legal service needs didn't just disappear, but when the in-house city attorney position left, those needs transitioned over to the external city attorney's office. So I think we need to look at things in a context of where are we spending this money and what are the issues, rather than just say internal legal services or external legal services. And then there's also the charter issue that says that the council is the one responsible for overseeing the city legal services. And I think that city legal services differ perhaps from the city staff legal services needs. And so we need to talk about that context also.
Do you mind if I respond to that?
Go ahead, Laura.
I do agree that I don't know if that conversation happens on Monday. I think it's a much larger discussion by the council. I think that we can have the background of that conversation and say, you know, we really would like to see this or whatnot. But really, I do think that that is a much bigger conversation than Monday night's meeting. We, you know, as I said, this budget is fluid. Obviously, if we approve a budget with something in it and 6 months down the line, the council says we want to, you know, hire an in-house city attorney, we can do a supplemental budget or do a transfer of a budget resolution to move the funding from one department to another. It's not something that has to be done this Monday, as long as it's not more than 10% per fund. Generally, it's okay. And it's likely that we wouldn't be moving the money to a different fund. It would be an inter transfer within the same fund of the general fund. So I think that I don't want the committee to feel pressured to make that decision in such a short time frame. But if there is other areas that they would like to spend the money, that's also an option for them on Monday.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And perhaps we could also take a look at the page that you included in the budget about legal services in other cities, where I see, for instance, that Lake Oswego has 4 full-time attorneys in-house on staff. So their legal services are got to be in the $800,000 range, and yet the size of their city is not that much larger than ours. So perhaps we can take a look at those numbers a little closer. And as I said, just put some context into the discussion instead of leaving the table with this bad feeling in our mouths that we haven't thoroughly discussed the issue with the members of the budget committee.
Right. And I also, as I can't remember who exactly requested the other night that I reach out, I think maybe it was Rory, that I reach out to some other jurisdictions to get some legal fees from them. So I did reach out to some finance directors of neighboring cities. And it is very hard to compare apples to apples. There's a lot of variables with legal services. There's a lot of people who include HR legal services with their general counsel, or they only have general counsel that includes HR. So it is challenging to compare apples to apples on those. So I'm going to try to do my best to kind of get some form of analysis, hopefully by next Monday night to you guys. But like I said, it might not be the perfect analysis.
Okay, it looks like we still have a few questions. Mayor Walters?
Yeah, mine's just a quick process question for Lauren. So do you think it's better that the council reach some sort of consensus through public meeting and then submit to you, or is it better if we just one-off share our thoughts with you so that you could be prepared on Monday?
That's a hard question. I mean, I think that as long as there's not any, I know basically what, we're talking about. I guess my comment was more if there's anything that we haven't discussed over the last few days, that's going to be like let's shift money from this department to this department and do this and this and this and reduce this budget line item. I want to know those things so that I can plug those into the budget. But if it's something that, like the idea of having body worn cameras or not, I'm already on top of that. I've already added that into the budget and I can take it out. So it's more so if it's just something that is out of left field that we haven't really talked about yet.
Okay. Jerry? No. Okay, Abby, up next.
Thank you. I had a question. Is it okay for, let's say I have a further question about the police department budget. Is it all right for me separately to engage in communication with Chief Mahuna? Perhaps CC the city manager on it? Is that okay under the way we're operating?
I would think it's fine, Abby. If you just want to contact me, I can share whatever questions you have with me, with the group. I can provide an answer to the group on Monday so that everybody's aware of what got asked and how it was answered.
That sounds good. I just don't want to be seen as, trying to do something behind closed doors or something like that. Just more questions that I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Abby. The email subject raises one comment I had real quick for our non-council members. I'm sure the council is aware of this, but we had an email that went out to everybody and then it was replied to everybody. And I don't think we're really supposed to be doing that. We're supposed to be discussing things in our public meeting and not replying to emails. So let's try and remember that in the future. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but maybe Kathy, if she's still awake, could enlighten us. But I just had the feeling we shouldn't be replying to all.
And that one was my fault and mea culpa on that.
No
I
fault,
did
just
say
a reminder. Just a reminder.
Thank you, though.
So with that, any other topics at this moment? Okay, I don't see any. So I don't know if this is an official, I guess this would be an adjournment for this evening. We will be adjourned and at 9:22 p.m.